Welcome, everyone, please, to our inaugural Sustainability in Action event. My name's Ewan. I'm the Chief Executive of Hauser and Wirth, and it's a joy to have such a fantastic group of friends and colleagues and associates from across the art world here in Somerset. And also a huge welcome to everyone who's online joining this event from all parts of the world. So I suspect it's very early morning in Los Angeles at this precise minute. So you are all very welcome. We really are thrilled that you're here to enjoy this afternoon of sharing best practice, learning from one another, discussing topics that really affect all of us across the art world to improve sustainability. Our artists are really at the heart of everything that we do, and several of them have been taking action for quite some time. Pipilotti Rist, who you will hear from today, was one of the first artists to work with Artists Commit, who are also here today. They worked together to produce a carbon impact report for her show at Mocha. Now, Somerset, here we are on such a beautiful afternoon, I think is really the home of sustainability for us at Hauser and Wirth. One of our senior technicians, Sam Taylor, and Hannah Wright, who at the time was an intern here in Somerset, set up our very first green team in 2016. Our green teams then and now are devoted to spending their time and energy to help us improve new ways of working each and every day. And while this is a true, I think, global issue, for me personally, being here in Somerset and the connection to the land is, I think, a reminder of what really is at stake with this climate emergency. This is partly why in March 2021 we appointed Cleona Murphy, who you'll hear from today, into a newly created role for the gallery as Global Head of Sustainability. And I think it's possibly still a unique role within the commercial gallery world. And Cleona's role really is to ensure that we hold ourselves accountable to deliver on our commitments. So what are our commitments? 3 simple objectives. Little harder to achieve, but simple objectives. One is to reduce our absolute greenhouse gas emissions, both energy and fuel, by a minimum of 50% by 2030, in line with the Paris Agreement. To sequester more carbon than our total footprint each year, and to reduce our freight, business travel, and exhibition construction emissions during this period. Now, how come? Why is that important? What's the best way of doing that? Well, we've taken a strong data-first approach because we quickly realized that we needed to fully understand our emissions to ensure that we put in place the right strategies for reduction. We've signed up to science-based targets for Scope 1 and Scope 2, and we'll be signing up for Scope 3 later this year. There's such an incredible amount of work to do, I think, as citizens of the world and as an organisation. So today, as I said, is about sharing, is about learning, and I think, most importantly, it's about supporting one another and really holding ourselves individually and collectively to be accountable to help the challenges that are ahead. We hope this will be the first of a series of annual events. Next year, it's our intention to have this event in Los Angeles, as so many of our speakers, in fact, are joining us down the line from LA. And then perhaps in 2 years' time, we'll invite you all back to Somerset, as we'll be celebrating then our 10th birthday anniversary, and, excitingly, to a fully decarbonised gallery. More on that a little bit later. Sort of just thinking about how to close my few words, I was reminded of something that Mark Bradford said when he was talking about the installation of Mithra in LA State Historic Park. Mark said, "You can look away, but you can't say you didn't know." Well, we all know what we're facing, and we all know the part that each and every one of us has to play. Thank you very much. Enjoy the afternoon, and over to Louisa.
Thank you, Ewan, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everybody wherever you are around the globe, and hello to our live audience here, because as well as a live audience here, as Ewan said, it's being beamed across, one of the magics of Zoom. So we're live streaming to an audience all around the world. My name's Louisa Buck, and I will be steering us through what promises to be a fascinating but packed afternoon. There's no doubt, you don't need me to say, Ewan's been saying, we all know over the last 2 years that the art world has at last woken up to the fact that there is this massive climate emergency. There's a climate and ecological emergency, and the art industry, with its flying, its shipping, its packaging, and its sheer production and consumption, has had a significant part to play in this. Steps are being made. Declaration of interest. I'm a founding member of the Gallery Climate Coalition, the international charity that's committed to decarbonising the art world and promoting zero waste. But as I said, we are in the throes of a genuine emergency. And as the title of this conference underlines, we need actions, not words, if we're going to avoid a catastrophic future. So to this end, this afternoon's event is divided up into 4 sessions. The first, because none of us would be here without them, is devoted to artists and what the artists themselves, their studios and the artist commissioning bodies are doing to consider the environment. So often artists get sort of pushed aside and talks about the art world and the massive industry, and particularly the environment. But I think we'll be hearing now, and we have artists in the audience, which is fantastic. And across the board, artists have so many amazing ways to raise profile, creative ways of addressing the climate crisis, directly, indirectly. So we wanted to really start with artists. And then panel number 2 addresses climate-conscious collecting, whether institutional or private collecting, and also what individual collectors can do themselves to influence, to make an impact, and to lead by example. Because here we are in a commercial gallery which relies on collectors, people buying both institutionally and privately. And collectors can have so much leverage and make such a difference. So that's another crucial one. Then around 4:10 we take a break, where everybody can go outside, take a breath of fresh air, hydrate, but not for very long, only for half an hour, because they're going to reconvene then for the 3rd session, which grapples with the practical nitty-gritty of actually how galleries can take concrete action, not using concrete though, we hope, to lessen their environmental impact. And then finally, as the storage and shipping and transportation of artworks, and indeed our bodies, is one of the art world's major generators of greenhouse gas emissions and general waste, the last session of the day, we're going to examine the various links in the supply chain and how they can work together to get those emissions down to minimise waste. So a hell of a lot to get through, and we're going to get through it. But before we kick off, just a little bit of housekeeping. As I mentioned, we'll be taking a snappy break just after 4 o'clock, and there are bathrooms in the main building. Please keep hydrated. Nice breeze here, but boy, it's hot. Red warning, global warming, keep hydrated, and there are refreshments available just outside. Also, if you want to nip out and have a drink in the middle of it all, please do, but not for too long. And the event, as I said, is being live streamed and filmed. We said this earlier, and that will be available to view on the Hauser and Wirth website in a few days' time. So do spread the word about that for anybody who hasn't been able to make it either in real life or online. And in order to minimise our own carbon expenditure, quite a few of our international speakers will be joining us on team, and the Hauser tech team have been working flat out to make all this go smoothly. So we'll be joining up the dots that way. Now, because we've got such a full agenda, unfortunately, we don't have time to have questions from the floor, either the physical floor or the virtual one. But obviously, there will be many questions and comments that will arise throughout this afternoon. And so, for all the speakers have said very kindly that they're prepared to answer any specific questions that you may have. So please do, and I'm saying this to everybody out there across the world, or indeed afterwards, do email any questions or points that you want to raise to any specific speaker, and the address is sustainability@hauserworth, all one word, .com, and we promise you'll receive a prompt response. So, without further ado, off to our first session devoted to how artists, artist studios and artist commissioners are working to achieve environmental best practice. And to open proceedings, here we have a pre-recorded but so lively, because I've seen it already, clarion call from the inimitable, the magnificent Pipilotti Rist. Over to you, Pippi.
Hello, dear friends and frenemies. I am honored to welcome you to the workshop Sustainability in Action in Somerset. I believe that only if all people take action, we can have a positive effect on our Earth. This is why I talk to you. As an artist, I want all people in the culture sector and beyond to engage. What do? I lick plates to save water and use my dirty laundry to clean the floor before I wash them. I acknowledge that I use more resources than I'm allowed to, but step by step, I'm working on reducing my footprint. I am proud and thankful that my last exhibition at LA MoCA was their first zero-emission show. They calculated our impact, then took action. Shipped our work by boat and not by air, reused installation materials, decreased room cooling by 2 degrees, improved museum recycling concepts, and triple compensated the remaining emissions with money. What can you do? Buy sustainable products, even if they are a bit more expensive. Insulate your house, replace gas heating for an electrical heat pump, and drive electric car. Compensate your air travels and eat less meat. Awareness and knowledge are the fundamentals for change. We have to reduce, share, reuse, compensate, recycle, stand also by our contradictions, but push for solutions. And while we can do a lot in our personal lives, mostly we have to pressure politics. Only the right regulations and incentives have a lasting impact for a fast change to sustainable energies and technologies for the South and the North. Don't forget that many engineers, scientists and industries are working day and night to find solutions. Support them! Thank you very much!
Woo! Well, I hope you all licked your plates after lunch, and I'm going to be expecting your laundry later. That sets such a great tone. I think awareness and knowledge are certainly what we're aiming for this afternoon. And now from Copenhagen, we have Bjørnstjerne Christiansen, the co-founder of SUPERFLEX. Hello! SUPERFLEX describe themselves as an expanding collective of humans and non-humans, working with expanding the idea of art. And recently, SUPERFLEX have been envisioning a future that bridges the gap between humans and nature with what they call interspecies living. And to this end, they're building new infrastructures to rethink society to accommodate the needs of all species, including, but not exclusively, us humans. So Bjørnstjerne, tell us all about this incredible plan. And welcome.
Hello. I'm actually not in Copenhagen. I'm in a tiny small island.
Oh,
where my family has a residence. So I'm actually surrounded by water.
How lovely.
The water is, and the ocean is crucial for everything that our dear friend Pippi also was talking about. But I will start just bombarding you with a lot of information. So be prepared. And maybe I'll try to keep the 7 minutes. So here I go. So SUPERFLEX started 30 years ago with the idea of opposing the concept or the myth of the artistic genius. We believe that many of our problems rise from the idea of the individual as the genius. So naturally, we created an artist, the three of us. It's an artist with 6 legs, and it's with a collective body. So then you move from SUPERFLEX and the idea about SUPERFLEX and 3 people working together. Of course, now we have a bigger studio, a director, and so forth. Great people working with us. But we then also think then it's important then to engage in public space. So we then started looking into how do you do that, and we focused on what we call expanded collective. So here's a park in Copenhagen, a 1 kilometer long park, where you have 70 different nationalities. So it's a very diverse space in Copenhagen, and everyone looked bad at this area. We said, why should we do that? Let's instead look at that many people come from different backgrounds. It's economic, culturally diverse. It's super important and interesting. So we developed a concept with 3 colors for the floor, and that every object should come from memory and from someone else and be proposed. We went so far, so we did something we call participation extreme. So we asked people in the area. Here it's 2 young Palestinian girls from Palestinian descent. They never went to Palestine. We asked them, where would you like to go? We would like to go to Palestine and bring back some soil. And then we traveled to their grandmother's olive orchard in Palestine, and they brought back 4 cubic meter of soil, earth, that now forms a hill on Superkeen. Every object here also have a tag, like in the art world, that says bench in Danish or in, for example, the Swiss. So really taking the idea of making public space to the extreme, becoming quite a colorful and diverse space. The next thing is then, as you also mentioned before, okay, we've now stated that, we have to move away from the singular to a collective and then go much further. So in the studio, we talk about interspecies living. So really, not really anymore talking about them or us, but trying to create a collective mindset that goes beyond the human scope. Here from a recent project in a university in Copenhagen that has already a focus on the collective mindset on every level. So we're here since we've been looking a lot into the ocean, been researchers and researching in the ocean with an organization called TBA21, Expedition Leaders of a Boat. We started diving into the ocean, trying to learn the preferences of what is in the ocean. And what we discovered was coralline algae, which is a pink algae that coral polyps like. So they attach to it and then they start building infrastructure. So basically we were giving a color from the ocean, but also preferences too, that we in the ocean prefer a diversity of surfaces, so maximize surface, create cracks and holes and so on. And actually we as humans can also do good with being able to and being forced to walk in a different way than we normally do. In universities, like all over the world, it's as fast as possible from A to B. So we created these organic shaped forms that are unique bricks that forces us to move in and out of different areas. And there you can encounter through holes and structures different types of people or other animals. It's also spread out through campus. We then made a contract for the interspecies campus, carved in marble. So we'll be there when archaeologists dive into that site. Among others, here it says, by entering an interspecies campus, the human acknowledges and commits to interspecies living. Which means slow down, listen, cultivate, and learn. Next step is then to really then also take it further than from doing infrastructure on land. So we started also developing sculptural infrastructure below and above, collectively working with the preferences of fish and animals on land. So also ourselves learning how to dive and explore the deep. Here is then a big project we launched in Denmark, like many other places. Humans have removed hard material from the ocean. For example, in Denmark, stone reefs means that there is basically deserts around us in the oceans. So no life, nothing that algae and other organisms can attach to. So you throw in a stone, you sink a boat, and immediately you see a biodiversity and life coming to like evolving. So here we are placing, as you can see here, as more services as possible. creates more life and possibilities. So with universities, we implemented them now recently in the summertime into the harbor of Copenhagen. You can come and visit. And they are there for a certain period of time and slowly then spreading out through Denmark. And then you've established that, infrastructure is important. Sculpture infrastructure, making sure that art plays an important role here also. So we then were invited to last year when there was a big conference in Ewan, a conference where the humans were traveling to discuss biodiversity and bring solutions. But again, something is missing. So humans are again turning to humans about what we can do about nature, but we forget the other creatures. So we had, during a deep night dive in the twilight zone in the coral sea in the Pacific, we encountered what is called the siphonophores, which are creatures that collectively work, much like the corals and humans. And they race from the bottom, deep bottom of the sea, up to the surface, clean everything that is in the surface, the sea surface, and drags it down to the seabed. So this is what is called the blue carbon. So they are our very dear friends. So we projected that on a 150-meter tall projection onto the building of the UN headquarters in New York, while the politicians were having talks in there. It's a little bit like you have a big party, but you forgot to invite this uncle that you don't really like so much. But here, we then forced them to really take into consideration other creatures' preferences. And you can see it from very far. I hope this film works here. So this is a bit of a speed up. So going from the singular to the collective, to the expanded, to interspecies living, we see that then we can maybe again become part of all species, because humans actually do right now need to take a pause. We made another work called interspecies assembly, where we, with a contract, force people to be idle. And we think that is a moment in time where humans are idle, listen, cultivate, learn, and then we act. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bjørnstjerne. Thank you so much, and enjoy that water. And I'm all for a bit of enforced idleness. I think this is a very fine skill, and a bit of vertical migration as well, actually, to clean things up. Thank you very much, and that's really inspirational and fascinating. Enjoy your water all around you. We're enjoying our air.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. And now, in real life, we have Natalie Tilbury, COO of the arts and mental health charity Hospital Rooms, who do so much important work. They're radically transforming the notoriously bleak NHS inpatient mental health units, and by introducing specially commissioned site-specific contemporary art. But as well as using art to assist in the treatment of mental health, Natalie's really here also to tell us about how Hospital Rooms are also putting environmental best practice into commissioning these artworks for various clinical settings in these patisserie projects. So it's a two-stranded preoccupation here, which is fascinating to me.
Absolutely, Louisa. Can you hear me? Yeah, great. It won't have escaped your notice that Molly Bennell, my colleague, isn't here with me today as she's unwell, but we're all sending her our best wishes.
Healing vibes.
Yeah, healing vibes. So thank you, Louisa, and thank you everyone for being here and for joining part of this conversation. So as Louisa says, we are an arts and mental health charity that commission emerging and established artists to create extraordinary artwork for NHS mental health units across the UK. We were founded 6 years ago by artist Tim A. Shaw and curator Neve White when a friend was sectioned after a suicide attempt. They were shocked to discover that the unit in which she was receiving care was bare, cold and clinical, devoid of comfort and creativity. They vowed to use their networks in the arts to make a change. So from what started as a standalone pilot project, Hospital Rooms has now commissioned over 150 artworks by artists including Sonia Boyce, Hervan Anderson, Mark Wallinger and Emma Talbot, permanently installed across the spectrum of inpatient mental health services, from mother and baby units to CAMS, forensic services and psychiatric intensive care. So as Louisa said, today I'd like to talk you through some of the unique sustainability challenges presented by commissioning the work that we do, the steps we're already taking to address our environmental impact across projects and exhibitions, and to introduce a radical new project that we are starting in September at Rosebud Centre. As we look ahead the next 12 months and beyond, our aim is to be nothing less than innovative leaders in the field of environmental best practice when commissioning artwork for clinical settings and participatory practices. So one of Hospital Room's core values is sustainability, and we're certain that by making bold commitments and radical changes now in terms of our environmental impact, we will have numerous positive outcomes for our organisation, our beneficiaries and the planet at large. But we also know that this involves culture and behaviour change internally, as well as an uplift in environmental literacy, knowledge and accountability. So how do we commission work? Well, there are significant challenges to installing artwork in clinical settings. Ubiquitous among mental health units is white rock, a PVC-U polymer used to clad walls, which is impossible to paint on or attach anything to. For any artwork to pass a risk assessment and to be cleared as compliant, surfaces must be wiped clean and able to withstand regular heavy cleaning with stringent cleaning products. Often this means using a plastic-based paint with TheraShield, such as Dulux Diamond Matte. Using canvases or works on paper is also difficult, although not impossible, but it requires overlaid Perspex boxes fixed with security screws. So we work with artists with a variety of different practices, from painters to video artists, and we want to explore with them how environmental responsibility can be a primary focus for them, for us to use as an organisation, and to empower service users who often feel excluded from wider social justice movements. So that's an example there of a Perspex box that we use. That's an artwork by Dryden Goodwin. So all projects start with workshops, and in the service user workshops we run as part of every project, we're encouraging concepts that produce minimal waste or waste that is edible, compostable or biodegradable, as so much of what we do can often end up sitting in a unit's activity room. So this is a natural dye printing workshop that we led at CAM's unit. Secondly, we're integrating education into all our workshops to have an environmental focus for service users, NHS staff, hospital room staff, cultural partners to invite conversation. So again, this is a chocolate workshop where we made chocolate characters, also in a CAMS mental health unit. And third, we're aiming to reduce harmful materials in our workshops. This involves educating staff and empowering them to share this information with artists to influence material lists for workshops. So we acknowledge that as an arts organisation, we will always be using materials and will never be perfect. But we also believe that by being conscious of the choices that we're making and continuing linked to other organisations, such as the GCC and TerraCycle, we can continue to support our efforts by closing existing waste streams and measuring our impact. So this is a major new project that we're working on at the moment at Springfield University Hospital in Tooting, where we're working with 19 artists and are trialling across 2 new builds and are trialling the use of new materials. So an important demonstration, I think, of the power of a small but mighty organisation such as ours is that Grafenstone paints with trace VOC, no plastics, petrochemicals or preservatives have been adopted by Springfield Hospital whole new build after our recommendation. In 1 2-story artwork created by Susie Hamilton, fun fact, the amount of CO2 that will be absorbed by the paint as it's curing is the equivalent of a Eurostar to Paris.
Whoa.
So this is going to be over 2 stories, so you can kind of get a sense of it here. It's going to be up this whole corridor. And working on a new build has also demonstrated to us the importance of selecting artists with similar values, practices and work so that we can continue to develop this further. So alongside our projects, we also produce a number of exhibitions every year, which presents a huge challenge from an environmental standpoint. As some of you may know, this year we announced a 3-year partnership with Hauser and Wirth, and we'll have an exhibition that's opening this August at the Savile Row Gallery, which I really encourage all of you to come if you can. And all the artworks that we're commissioning there, including a 15-metre wide painting on plywood by Mark Titchener, will be either permanently installed in inpatient mental health units after the show or go on to be used as part of other artworks. We're also partnering with Coat, which is a low VOC paint brand. And this is just an idea, so it's like a small idea of part of the show. You can see how big that artwork is there. But what next? We want to go further. We want to push things as far as we can. So driven by our commitment to be a carbon neutral organisation by 2030, this September we'll be trialling a radical new project within mental health services that puts the climate crisis at the heart of the concepts that we explore, implementation and governance. We hope to demonstrate a real cultural change at hospital rooms where our environmental impact is at the heart of decision making, both on broad strategic goals and also on everyday tasks. So we will be working with people living with severe mental illness at Rosebud Centre in Kent and Medway NHS Trust by leading innovative art workshops and commissioning 5 extraordinary artworks by artists deeply committed to climate themes that will transform the residential setting. We'll be particularly focused on understanding whether a social activist aspect to our projects, separate from addressing the mental health crisis, causes any new or different outcomes for the patients that we collaborate with. So thanks to the success of our trial using low VOC paints at Springfield and proving that these materials can offer the same quality to artists, as well as a reduced environmental impact, we will also be working again with a sustainable paint brand across the project, and we'll be providing our artists with access to professional quality paint by Winsor & Newton that was originally created with the wrong labels and would have gone to waste, and that's all been donated to us. So we're pulling all of that from landfill. And over the next 12 months, we'll be improving our environmental literacy in our board, workforce, participants and audience to bring environmentally engaged concepts and activism into the creative activity and artworks we commission. At Rosebud Centre, we'll also be commissioning artists that are critically and vocally engaged with the climate crisis, such as Liz Elton, and this will form a seminal part of our artist selection process moving forward. So as our organisation continues to grow, we also want to use our community to support artists through peer-to-peer learning, with partners engaged with climate justice, and attending wider events for the sector, such as those led by the GCC, to diversify their skills and support their journey to take action on climate change. And these are just some other examples of artworks that we've installed recently in the last 12 months. So the communities we work with, in conclusion, are often small and the service users and patients marginalised from society. What Hospital Rooms does is demonstrate that these spaces can be places of imagination, hope and inspiration. We hope that providing service users and staff with agency over the way these spaces look, by demonstrating the care that has been invested in artist selection, materials and themes that facilitate better physical and mental health, and by working with communities to reaffirm that their own actions matter, we can grow a groundswell of positive change. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you. Small but how mighty? How mighty are you and your organisation? And I think it's so interesting. At the GCC, we had a informal brainstorming with a number of artists. And what came out very strongly from these conversations, all kinds slightly off the record, but I'm not naming any names, people said, the commissioners haven't got a clue. You know, we're given these public commissions, people offer us these public commissions, we're part of this process, we get given the gig, we're really excited, but nobody in the commissioning body, whether it's public, whether it's local authorities or some kind of public commissioner or indeed private commissioners, factor in the environment. So it's so inspirational what you're doing, and also just with the materials and all the kind of ideas that you're now making the hospitals implement that. So the reach can be so great, and I think it's really wonderful that you've given us this information, and I'm personally very overexcited about it. But anyway, reining back in, now we're going back into virtual land, and we're going to be going across now to New York to hear from the artist Deville Cohen of Artists Commit, the artist-led collective committed, as its name implies, to artists working towards a climate-conscious, resilient and equitable future, both for the work that they make and also how that work moves and travels through the art world. And with him is also Laura Lupton, who's a co-founder of Artists Commit, and also its sister organisation, Galleries Commit. And she's done a lot of founding as Laura, a co-founder of Barda Art, which is the inspirational peer-to-peer resource sharing school, tool, not school, but maybe it'll have a school, sharing tool for the arts. So Barda is also a fascinating thing. So over now to you two from New York to tell us about what you're doing with Artists Commit. Hello, welcome.
Hi. Thank you to Louisa and Hauser and Wirth for having us today, and also highlighting climate action and sustainability. My name is Laura Lupton. I am a gallery worker based in New York City, which is the traditional territory of the Black and American people. And I'm here with the artist Deville Cohen to talk about Artists Commit and how galleries, institutions, and artists can work together to catalyze climate action in the sector. So as Louisa mentioned, I'm the co-founder of a few different initiatives at the intersection of art and climate, Artists Commit and Galleries Commit, as well as Barter.art, which is a resource sharing tool for the art world. You can both source and offload things like pedestals, AV equipment, crates to promote more circular material reuse in our sector. Artists Commit and Galleries Commit are also founding members of the Visual Arts Pact, As a self-directed and volunteer-led coalition led by artists and workers, then Artists Commit and Galleries Commit are particularly grateful to have a larger network that support this action through PACT. There are 8 organizations. We're able to align on key targets and language, benefit from each other's resources and work without overlapping, while also having our own independent networks and approach. Several PACT members are here today, including Art Switch and Art to Acres, who you'll hear from next.
We've lost, I'm not sure whether you can hear us, but we've lost your connection for a bit. Can you wind back a bit? We can't hear you, sadly.
Okay,
We got to the end of PACT.
Okay. I see my slide on the screen, so I'm gonna keep going.
Yeah, we got to the end of PACT. If you could just fill us in a bit more from then on.
Okay. So I'm here today to talk specifically about one framework for climate action that we developed with Artists Commit, which is the Climate Impact Report. Before I get to that, which Deville will talk more about, I'll give you a little bit of background on how we got here and some other things that we do. So I've worked for the past decade collaborating closely with artists to produce ambitious, often quite large-scale projects. And I essentially just wanted to be able to keep doing my job, working with artists that I love, on projects that inspire me, but with climate as one acceptable decision-making priority. At the time, it was always how to do something as fast as possible and as cheap as possible. And I just wanted to at least be able to consider decision-making that more closely aligned with my personal values for myself, for my future, for my community, and for my planet. For me to feel like I could do that, I needed a sense that it was a community and a movement happening. It wasn't just a personal project. So my first step was reaching out to others, including asking around to see what was already happening. Through that, I was introduced to artists like Deville Cohen and Mika Rottenberg, who were already meeting about a Culture Declares Emergency New York chapter. Conversations with that network helped me to understand some of the specific ways that I could contribute from my role as a gallery worker, and inspired me to reach out to other gallery workers, mostly from the younger generation that had a shared concern about the climate crisis for our own futures. And that resulted in an open letter of gallery worker signatures. That letter now has over 150 worker signatures, representing workers coming from over 60 different New York City galleries. That naturally led to a lot of artist support. We had over 300 artist signatures, initially as allies, and out of that we decided to find...
Joys of technology, don't we love it? I think maybe Deville, maybe you could speak. Laura, we've lost you for a bit. How's Deville, how's your connection going?
I think mine is doing great.
Sorry, we might... You can do semaphore, Laura, from the top.
Well, you know the rest. You can read my
I'm sorry, we got the gist of it, and I'm very happy that we're all opposing fast and cheap. We don't want fast and cheap. We want slow and costly, and all the talk. No, Deville, go ahead. Go ahead. Let's hope the old connection holds up.
Fantastic. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, everybody. Hi. So really to follow up on what Laura said, I think when we formed Artists Commit, one of the first questions that we asked ourselves was, how can artists help catalyze change? That led us to thinking about how to leverage an artist exhibition as a catalyst for a presenting partner and an artist to engage in a conversation and dialogue about the climate impact of an exhibition, which eventually evolved into our Climate Impact Report that we launched last fall. The CIR, the Climate Impact Report, is primarily a framework for a dialogue within the project team and a tool for better understanding the project climate impact. The point is to help your project team learn about the key areas of climate impact, be introduced to the tools and resources available to support climate-conscious exhibition making, and to promote a practice of transparency where we are both normalize the conversation in project planning and start to share these realities throughout the sector. That includes being clear about challenges we face, successful strategies we implemented to meet those challenges, as well as the things that we couldn't solve but recognize that we need to. What's great about the Climate Impact Report is that it can be done as a standalone report or as something that ties into institution-wide climate policies. Practically, the CIR has 4 core areas of climate action to look at: cut emission, eliminate waste, support people, and collective action. For cutting emission, a project team calculates carbon emission from flights, outward shipping, and electricity use. These are the three most commonly high areas of emission of exhibition, not including visitor travels. Some of the most impactful climate action you can take are reducing flights, opting for road sea freight instead of air freight, shifting energy to renewable sources, and slowing down exhibition turnover. Here's an example from Robin Williams' painting show at CIR at PPOW last fall. For eliminating waste, the best first step is to make a material afterlife embedded into planning, so that you know from the very beginning where exhibition materials is going to end up after the project, and can make better responsible decision about sourcing. Here is an example of a material report from Marley's Freeman show at Karma Gallery that is currently up in New York City. The framing for the work in the show were produced by Dominic Framing in Long Island City, and 3 unique frames were made in collaboration between Marley Freeman and Lucas Geronimus. What I find very exciting and special about this show and its report is that it also focuses on the material, process, and collaboration of those frames. For supporting people, this is about having conversation with your immediate team to ask what they feel they need in order to work on a climate impact work, and to be able to show up with creative climate solutions. Here is what MoCA submitted for their Pipilotti Rist solo exhibition last year. Collective action is our way of building a movement that extends beyond your project team, making sure to build a type of community network that will make this ongoing and sustainable. Simply doing a climate impact report and sharing it on the Artist Commit platform is one way of doing this. Here is what Anika and the Tate Modern submitted for their Turbine Oil Commission last year. They printed the report in the exhibition catalog, and by asking their production partner about climate approaches, it resulted in 2 new climate policies being created. To promote collective action, doing a report with working group is a great strategy. When I did my report last fall from a show at Peace 122 Gallery, we did it with a group of other projects so we could ask questions, model templates for each other, make joint decisions with, and simply keep each other accountable. Or again, to connect with the rest of the visual arts pact or other local initiative happening as well to support your climate action. If you're curious about what actual process look like, check out our existing reports on our website and take a look at our submission form. Otherwise, check out Artist Commit and the Visual Art Pack for more resources. And our contact information is here if you have any questions or want to follow up. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Deville. Thank you so much. I'm sorry about the signal, but I'm so glad to have seen you and heard from you. And I think it was so important what you were saying. And also the whole thing about PACT is so crucial because, you know, you can join many organisations. They're not all siloed. We're all trying to survive. We're all trying to improve the situation on the planet. And so, you know, all these organisations working together towards the same end. It's so crucial to have that, I think. So many thanks to you both. And do check out Galleries Commit, Artists Commit. Check out all the organisations and then join them all. Now we're going across to Art Switch, based both in New York and in Amsterdam. Let's hope the connection holds up better in this case. And this is another really important organisation working with artists, organisations and institutions to develop a climate-conscious practices right across the art world. And Art Switch describes itself as an international hub and idea foundry. And joining us on Zoom from New York, we have its co-founder, Johanna Rietveld, and fellow Switch co-director, Anika Schroter, to tell us how and what this idea foundry has been hammering out. So let's find out from Art Switch what they're doing and what can be done.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to Hauser and Wirth for having us today. We are thrilled to participate in this panel. My name is Johanna Rietveld. I'm here with Anika Schroter, and together we are Art Switch.
So yeah, AdSwitch is a knowledge center for sustainability in the arts. We are based between New York and Amsterdam and running as a non-profit organization, and founded this in 2019. We publish, we network, and we've been connecting art professionals with academia and museums and galleries ever since. As Laura mentioned, we are also a founding member of the Pact that was formed last year. So our first approach really was to organize a conference series that took place during COVID in 2020 and 2021. And with this series, we wanted to see what's out there really and map the terrain on environmental sustainable practices, bridging the knowledge gaps, as it is in our DNA really to give a platform and amplify new voices, new ideas, new practices. So we kicked it off with this conference series called Reframing the Arts, a Sustainable Shift, in collaboration with the University of Amsterdam and the University of Nijrode. It was a 4-part conference series, and we opened it up with a very broad kind of macro perspective on institutional approaches to environmental sustainability, narrowing it down through exhibitions, logistics, and then closing it off with a very detailed micro look on materials. So we were really thrilled and happy to have almost 750 attendees and 46 speakers joining us. And we're excited to see so many of them also during this event today here. So linking that back to the community idea, one of our main outcomes of that conference series was that we could see how the audience was growing with each conference. And with this growth of audience, also a community was created around, and which ever since has leveraged so many discussions and new conversations. And so we can join the chorus on the fact that community really is a catalysator and is helping to shift the art practices towards a more climate conscious future.
To give some context to what Anika was just saying, we wanted to very broadly simplified also sketch the landscape of 2019 to now of sustainability in the arts. When we started in 2019, it honestly felt a little like the Wild West. Anything seemed possible, but also everything was chaotic and unorganized. We were lacking networks and resources to share all the information that we were creating. A lot has happened since. Many organizations popped up between 2020, 2021. Shout out to a few of the old timers, such as Julie's Bicycle and Art to Acres. New sectors also got involved. A discussion that was mainly museum-oriented in the beginning became very gallery-oriented, and we discovered that galleries allowed a faster implementation of solutions due to their flexibility. Auction houses got involved, but also sectors fringing the art world, but making it possible, such as logistics, art insurance, law, and all these sectors started to collaboratively create new standards and guidelines, and this is where we are now. The questions have changed. There are more research groups, such as the ones from GCC. The questions are more detailed and action-oriented. There's more carbon auditing. We just heard about the climate impact reports. We'll hear about Art to Acres work. And there are more summits to share all this knowledge, as this one. A shift in mindset came up. And what Louisa was also talking about before is we're looking into slowing down the art world and actually changing the structures of the system. Parallel to these changes, the media landscape has changed a lot too. The amount of press articles has exponentially grown over the past few months, and chapeau, Louisa, to you for all the work you've done in this field.
So yeah, as Johanna says, the questions have changed, and with that, the role of the artist has changed as well. And with this, again, the artist's agency has become more evident. So in the second part of the presentation, we want to dive quickly into the artist's impact on its ecosystem. And Johanna will quickly talk you through 4 examples of artists that we've been working with in the past.
So as a first example, we wanted to share the work of Michael Wang. He was one of the first artists to dive into the carbon footprint of contemporary artworks with his series Carbon Copies, which was exhibited at Foxy Production in 2012. Carbon Copies, for this work, he investigated, which was a Sherlock Holmes type investigation online with little resources and transparency, the carbon that was created in the production of contemporary well-known artworks. We have the example here of Jan Vo, We the People. The final object mirrors the volume of carbon dioxide that was released in the production, and the price of each carbon copy is the exact dollar amount it would take to remove this quantity from the atmosphere through certified carbon offsets. And the proceeds of the sale of every artwork went to that end. Diving more into the logistics side of it, of the studio practice, we wanted to share two tools. First one is the survey by Alice Bonneau, independent curator, sustainability consultant, and the founder of the sustainable residency Villa Villa. In this survey, how sustainable is your artist studio practice? She researched how far artists have come in adopting more sustainable practices and the challenges they face. The results are a combination of barriers and opportunities that artists have, but also some advice about the materials to use, which one not to use, what to replace them with. Looking more into materials, and if anyone is interested in diving more into this, it is entirely available online on Villa Villa's website. And then parallel to this, I wanted to talk about Stitch. Stitch is an online resource, also free, sustainability tools in cultural heritage. And it provides a life cycle assessment, carbon calculator, library of case studies, and information sheets diving into all the materials that we use in the art world, from an artist's perspective, but also from an art professional perspective. Stitch was created, developed by Sarah Nunberg, Sarah Sutton, Matthew Eckelman, and Sarah Sanchez. Looking further into materials, and especially alternative materials to plastic, Erik Larebeek is a great example. He, for the past years, has been diving into different materials, maybe mycelium, algae-based materials, and questioning the white cube as a space for art, looking into living spaces for artworks. For a recent exhibition, The Breakdown Economy at Museum Boijmans van Beuningen, curated by Anne-Martine van Kessler, Erik researched the seaweed cycle and developed a new material called weedware. He used this material to create copies from the collection of the Boijmans, and you see a few examples here online. Not only has he been diving into a utopic research of these materials, but he's been focusing also very concretely on how to implement these materials into the production supply of everyday objects we use. And one example is using weedware to create the pots for flower and plant pots that you could actually plant in the soil directly. Finally, last but not least, Forma Fantasma is a great example of a research-based design studio. They were also talking at one of our conferences, one on materials. And with their project, Cambio, they have investigated the extraction, production, and distribution of wood products. For this project, they combined resources, interviewed experts, academics, and created this online archive, which you can see on their website, Cambio, researching the history and the structures of the timber industry. The Cambio is now on view at the Helsinki Design Museum. And for this iteration, they collaborated with a furniture company, Artek. They are now working together with Artek to investigate the Finnish wood industry, but also to actually work with one of the key players to see how we can change our production supply and make it more environmentally conscious.
So yeah, where do we stand? Where are we heading to? crucial questions. There is no golden answer yet, but we believe we can sum this up as you can see there are many ways to include climate conscious practices into an artist's studio. It can be through the content, the messages, or the experience created through logistics, or also through its influences on the supply chain, all infused by research and collaboration. But lastly, the topic of sustainable artist studios is still pretty fresh, and it feels similar to the scene in 2019 when we started with Art Switch. So what we can share is definitely that we've learned that resource sharing and community are the keys to the progress and future practices.
If you have any more questions, we would love to hear from you. We have an upcoming project, which is going to be an online resource knowledge center for anything art and sustainability related, launching at the end of this year, called The Vertical. Please reach out. Our email is here, and we're always open to collaborations and questions. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Johanna and Anika. Thank you very, very much. And yes, do either email them directly or at that sustainability email that I flagged up at the beginning, and I will flag up again at the end, and so it's etched into your hearts. I mean, I think their point is so interesting, that there is artists are as various as all of us, and the solutions, the ways of addressing it are as various as all of us. But I think it's interesting to say that, you know, we're at the beginning, and it is a very different kind of situation now to how it was in 2019, and we've all got to get cracking. So on that note, I'm going to come to our last speaker now for this session, which is the artist and conservationist. So she's combining both strands of activity. Hayley Mellin. In 2017, she founded Art to Acres, which they've been mentioning, Johanna and Anika mentioned already. It's been going a while. It's a crucial organisation, artist-run, not-for-profit initiative, which supports permanent, large-scale land conservation with a focus on climate, on indigenous peoples, and beta diversity. And Hayley will be telling you more about that in 2 seconds. She also supported the first carbon-neutral exhibitions at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, and she also supported them at the Guggenheim as well. And she was instrumental in MoCA, Los Angeles, forming an environmental council, I think the first for a major museum in the United States. So, you know, a tremendous mover and influencer, and Hayley's going to be talking to us now about the meshing of her art and her environmentalism. So welcome virtually, Hayley. Let's be hearing from you. Hello.
Hi, thank you so much for that wonderful welcome, Louisa. And thank you to Ewan, Ivan, Debbie, Phoebe, and Cleona for just the work that you've been doing over time. It's been such a pleasure to collaborate with Hauser and Wirth, and as evidenced today, and how you can gather community and bring people together to educate and change. So thank you. I find that there is something about these communal talks that can be so effective. And if there's one thing that I'm going to try to share today, it's our sense of agency, that we can come together in collaborative teams and be exceptionally effective as a community. So again, I'm an artist right now. I'm in the Frieze offices in London. Thank you to Matthew Slotover, GCC co-founder, for hosting me here. We had a lovely lunch at their ethical restaurant, Toplis. Highly recommend it. And I just wanted to go across a bunch of different images. I'm going to focus today on painting, conservation, like land conservation and community. And I'll just start the slides. I am based in San Francisco and New York. And as a painter, one of the questions I had was, how can I be effective in a way that is lasting, right? Because one of the questions you look at as an artist is duration, is time. It's like, what is the action that you're going to do now that's going to concretize effect over time, over ideally hundreds of years? So my interest has been land conservation, and I tend to paint outside. I tend to paint in an experiential way, on site. Usually you're very wet, you're very dirty. This is a picture taken a week and a half ago in Guatemala. I was doing a due diligence review of a forest we've been supporting in conservation that actually Hauser's been very key in supporting with some of their artists, Mika Rottenberg, Rashid Johnson. And so I was doing a review with the rangers, looking at different contract negotiations, and then I was able to take 6 days and work on site. So there's something amazing about painting not from a photograph, but painting from experience, because the light's always changing. It's hard. It's hard in a way of like, you're kind of overwhelmed. But it's also very moving to try to be in a location that is historic. So this is a forest that's 80 million years in duration, and you're surrounded by new species that haven't yet been noted in science. And so it is very hands-on. But the majority of my time as an artist is dedicated to land conservation through a nonprofit that Louisa just mentioned called Art to Acres. And the purpose is to bring the art community in concert with the most effective, permanent, new protected area projects on the planet. So taking a landscape that would otherwise be converted to agriculture, and then instead deciding, okay, because of its biodiversity significance or its carbon significance, or for many, many different reasons, its indigenous population present, we are going to support the local people doing locally led projects that are in permanent protected areas. So national parks or indigenous protected areas, et cetera. We've supported 30 million acres to date. We just finished 2 days ago this year's portfolio, and it was another 10 million acres. And so it's been really impactful because of the art community. So artists will donate artworks that are sold at the direction they have. Museums will include this in their strategic climate fund donation as they do their drawdown after doing a carbon audit on the GCC calculator. Artists, after doing a climate impact report with Artist Commit, will come on and make a donation, as many of the artists on the Artist Commit platform have done, Anika, Deville, to conserve land. Now, again, as I mentioned, it has to start in community. It has to start with people. And so this is a picture of a signing we did for this very forest in Guatemala by the Nobel Peace Prize winner, Rigoberta Menchú. She won it in 1991. And here she is signing a declaration of, actually, she owns some of the land in the forest, of it into conservation. Some of the communities don't read or write, and so they'll sign treaties with the government through fingerprints, which I think is a really interesting form of human engaged technology. And this is a picture taken a week ago that I always try to go on site and meet the people who are doing the work, who are looking at the strategies. And this is a picture taken in the city, Guatemala City, with the son of the ex-president, Marco Cerezo, and the team there who are just doing the scientific study to apply for national designation. So informing Art to Acres, I really wanted to connect artists, the notion of one sort of square painting or one object into one protected area. And that was great. Artists are so benevolent and they really get vision. They get the sense of legacy. Like, okay, this painting is going to go forward in time, or this video is going to go forward in time. And so will this protected area. And so that was a very clear connection. And then the artist Mika Rottenberg reached out in 2019 and she said, hey, my friend Kelty Ferris did this work, conserved some landscape. And I'd like to do this as well, but I'd like to connect it, as Louisa said, to my MCA Chicago exhibition. And so this was the first time we ever worked with a particular museum show. And she did a carbon assessment and she gave, I think she conserved 7 acres of land permanently on behalf of this exhibition. And so Mika really came forward and invented the concept. And since then, I've been working quite a lot as an artist through a Tiger Foundation grant in doing carbon support, carbon calculations for museum and art exhibitions. And so Pipilotti Rist, for example, worked with her team very closely on creating this Artist Commit report, where she detailed both all the carbon of her exhibitions, but also all the waste, as Deville was saying. And so it's been very effective to use the GCC carbon calculator and then to figure out how to reduce as much as possible the emissions, and then to do a donation to Art to Acres or ClientEarth or any strategic climate fund for the carbon that you do need to draw down. This is the first museum calculation I ever did. This was in 2020. It was the first one in the United States that was ever done through the Rem Koolhaas. And they had 127 metric tons of carbon. Since then, now we're working on the second one for the Guggenheim, and they've really learned a lot. And they've changed a lot of their shipping practices thanks to the support of Alexa from Root Collaborative, who's their sustainability advisor. Recently worked with IC8 Miami, and they were so awesome in doing their calculation. They were like, hey, we could just not ship works one by one. We could wait until we have a bulk of artworks and then send them. So now they've changed actually their transit policies because of this report. And this was the calculation. And because they really just saw, hey, the bulk wasn't shipping. One of the things I like about the GCC approach is like, look at where the bulk is and focus on that. As Louisa mentioned, I co-founded the MoCA Environmental Council, which is the first environmental council for a United States museum. And one of the things we saw in doing the MoCA carbon report was that the bulk was in their chilled water to cool the museum. And so we're taking that museum solar thanks to a Helen Frankenthaler Climate Initiative grant. Now, moving forward to community, one of the things I love, as was noted in the Art Switch presentation, is the community that's come forward around sustainability, how inclusive it is. And Galleries Commit, Laura sort of contacted me and she said, hey, we'd really love to conserve one landscape together. And so this was the first ever, it's a location in Peru, near Machu Picchu. It's the first time the art community on an industry side has come together and conserved one location. It was a really successful project that Laura and the team at Galleries Commit stewarded really independently of me. They just did a wonderful job. And this is a location that supplies water for 40,000 people. So here are listed the different galleries, museums, artists, individuals, and institutions such as Art Forum or schools who supported this conservation through micro donations often to conserve the 200,000 acres. So that's about, 10 times the size of Manhattan. It's quite large. A little bit on the MoCA Environmental Council, the purpose of doing this as an artist and teaming up with another artist, Njideka Crosby, for this was to really just start to focus on sustainability in museums. And now, since this was 2020, now in the last 2 years, almost every museum has some form of action, climate-wise or sustainability-wise. So it's been fantastic. And then just to reiterate, I think as an artist and as a painter, I really love the concept of how time can gestate form. PACT is a great example of that, Partners for Arts Climate Targets. And it does include all of these different initiatives really that have come forward, at least a good handful of them. And I recommend going to the website, but Art to Zero as an organization sort of stewarded us coming together. We get together on the phone once every 2 months, talk through ideas, possibilities. It's super fun. Everyone's like, hands get dirty, and we go for it. I co-founded an organization in San Francisco called Art and Climate Action, and that's like regional, right? Bay Area based. But then this notion of an overview such as PACT gives us a sense of larger community. So I think community is super important for any artists in the audience. For myself as an artist, Artist Commit was a thing that I wanted to join and be a part of. And we welcome everyone. So wherever you are, please come to a meeting. It's really delightful. And I think artists, first and foremost, should commit to our climate emergency and making change because ideally, we're going to hopefully create some of the solutions for this space. So I think to sum it up, community brings us the strength possible to do our individual capacity strengths. And for me, land conservation, working on contracts, negotiations, due diligence, legal approaches to conserving land. A lot of times we're just founding new laws. Just supported the first ever environmental framework law in Suriname. They had no legal structure for conserving land. And now we're going to focus on 18 million acres there. That's exciting for me, but that's just not one person. So I think like what you're noticing with SUPERFLEX, with Bjørn, like that's such an incredibly creative crew. And his work is just mind-boggling. Like I love looking at it. And so I think that there's this way of us all coming together to do good. And we have about 8 years, as Matthew said today at lunch. So let's get our hands dirty and do it. So thank you to everyone at Hauser and Wirth for inaugurating today. And also for Cleona, their head of global sustainability, for being such an amazing thought partner for us all.
Thank you. Thank you, Haley. Thank you very much. Well, I think our first session shows artists can get things done in myriad ways. And that this is just a tiny snapshot of how artists, and indeed their commissioners, can get things done. I'm now going to welcome up my next lineup of wonderful panelists to come up onto the stage. I'm going to sit at the end, get you all up, and we will kick off with our next panel. staircase over there. I'm sitting at the end.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't mind anyone. I don't know what the plasma is. I think you're here, David. I think Dave is next to me.
Okay.
Yes. Hello, Francis.
Swap over there.
Francis.
Okay, order. Next panel, then there's the break, I promise. So everyone's got water, are you all mic'd up, turned on, hydrated? Everybody now fully wired up and water poured. So, well, that was a fantastic kickoff with the first session. And now we're going to move swiftly on to our next panel, which deals with the... Go a little bit further away from poor David. I seem to be screaming down his ear. Which zeroes on the art itself. You know, the art itself and how those who acquire it, whether publicly, whether in public institutions, private museums, or private individual collectors, and how they can develop and maintain their collections with responsibility. So it's the buying, the curating, the owning. And we'll be looking at the role also of the private collector in sponsoring, profile making, profile raising, and generally encouraging good environmental practice. So to tackle these weighty issues, we've got Frances Morris, doesn't need much introduction, director of Tate Modern, which has been an environmental trailblazer. In 2019, that memorable moment when a woman on a white horse in a growing grass coat walked into the turbine hall and Tate declared climate emergency. It's just one of the many measures that they've taken, actually before then, but also since then. And she's going to be talking about how this is zeroing in, particularly in the collecting side of things. Then joining us from the US, hello, yes, there he is, hooray, Paul Tukey, the Director of Environmental Stewardship, which I think is a great title. Every museum should have one, at Glenstone Museum in Maryland. And this is a private museum which has been fostering sustainability and regeneration right across its activities for well over a decade. And is apparently, so Paul tells me, the most energy-efficient museum structure in the world today. So that's jolly impressive. And then here we've got the collector and patron, David Roberts, of the Roberts Institute of Art, who puts environmental concerns in his day job, in his property business, as well as in his private art patronage. We're going to be hearing more about that. And then finally, to give an overview into how collectors have galvanised and can be galvanised across the board, is Isla Angus, Culture Partnerships Manager of ClientEarth. And this is an amazing environmental charity which uses the law to fight climate change, to take corporations, to take countries, nations, governments to court, to challenge pollution, to fight for climate change, defend wildlife, and generally protect the planet. And actually, just recently, it was a partnership between Christie's and the Gallery Climate Coalition called Artists for ClientEarth, which recently raised more than £5.5 million for ClientEarth through the artists Cecily Brown, Anthony Gormley, Beatrice Malaise, Rashid Johnson, Zai Nanjing, and their art and their galleries very generously donating works for sale. And of course, then the collectors who bought the works to raise that money. So it brings it all round, all these different myriad ways that collectors and collecting can have an impact. And so I'm going to kick off with Frances. Yes, I'm kicking off with you. And I just want to talk to you, I mean, if you could just give a bit of a snapshot about what Tate has been doing in general as well as with collections, because it's all intermingled, but also very interestingly, you told me we were having a preliminary chat that actually Tate is now putting sustainability actually into its acquisitions policy, considering sustainability with the artworks you buy as part of the criteria for selecting works for the collection. So a bit of a broad brushstroke and then zeroing in on the collections would be fantastic.
Thank you, Louisa. But I have to say that it feels nothing but totally positive and really quite exciting to be with such an extraordinary group of dedicated, passionate people from all over the art world. And it feels like, you know, there was the coronavirus, but this is another virus. And we're infecting each other in a good way. And it's also, I think, very notable and suitable that we're at Hauser, and at Tate we've had a very long relationship with Hauser, who've been instrumental in supporting Tate, but also a source of many remarkable acquisitions and exhibition projects over the years. So this is a good place to have a conversation about collecting. talking about sustainability and collecting has been the most recent bit of a journey that officially began when we declared climate emergency in 2019. But that really, I think, dates from the early part of this century when we began thinking about the expansion of Tate Modern and the conception of the Blavatnik building, then called TM2, I think. And despite the fact that, of course, the whole thing's made of concrete and we now would never do concrete again, it was conceived by the architects and our estates team to challenge all the standards of environmental standards at that time. So unusually for a museum building, only has air conditioning in its gallery spaces. Throughout the rest of the building, it's either freezing cold in the winter or boiling hot in the summer, and lots of other things that really made it a kind of landmark and challenged some of the things that we then did inside it. But declaring the emergency for us could only happen and was held back by our sponsorship with BP, which came to an end in 2016. And it was therefore a kind of coming out where we could confess all that we had been doing for many years and galvanise hugely the colleagues across the institution and our own networks. And I think it's really important to state that unlike perhaps many of the other organisations here, but like some of them, we very much made that declaration in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals. Because we're an international organisation and we have an international collection and relationships globally, global south, global north, rich and poor, it felt that we had to acknowledge climate emergency as part of an intersection of other emergencies, and as well the roots of those emergencies in our own colonial and kind of patriarchal past. And as somebody who'd done a lot of work working on gender, it felt almost a sort of natural development from trying to rebalance the gender in the collection to thinking about the impact of climate on art history and looking at art history through a sort of ecological lens. So apart from taking all the types of measures that others have spoken to today to bring down our emissions, we also took on two other challenges. One was to think about our programme, to begin to tell those stories, the stories that demonstrate the intersection, and the other was to take on a role of advocacy and sectorial collaboration. And that has been principally to date within the public sector and within museums internationally. I'm on the board of CMAM and help run their sustainability group. I've been involved, like others here, a little bit with the ICOM Sustainability Working Group, but also with Plus Tate networks across the UK, the What's Next group in London, and latterly and brilliantly with the Galleries Climate Coalition. And actually, I think to crack that north-south divide or the kind of private-public divide is absolutely crucial here. We have no time for those kind of borders. So the activity has been across those three fronts. And but I think one of the things that we have acknowledged, and I'm sure other people acknowledge too, that there comes a point when you can reduce no further within your framework, your conventions, your programs. And we have already reached our 2023 target of cutting our emissions by 50%, which is a little bit ahead of time.
That's pretty good.
And probably a little bit as a result of COVID and being closed for 200 days, but we're going to keep it there. And we are on target for 2030, and we would love not to have to do offsetting. We would love to do it just by our own means. But in order to do that, it's going to mean a pretty radical change to our business model and our behaviours. And some of you may have noticed that there are fewer exhibitions at Tate now. At Tate Modern, our exhibition programme, we've reduced by about a half. We put 30% more of our space into working with our collection, so reusing, recycling, repairing, all that wonderful stuff that otherwise would be deep in its bunker storage. And exhibitions are now half the number, and they are twice as long. There are all sorts of challenges around the business case for that, but it is a way of cutting down activity massively. And those exhibitions, many of them now, we try and work with single collection or single lenders. So the Giacometti exhibition, working with the Picasso Museum on Picasso 1932. We have a wonderful Mondrian af Klimt exhibition in the spring, working with 2 principal collections. So significantly reducing the shipping around exhibitions. But so the program is one thing, and of course, having thought quite deeply about the program and how do we effectively adopt a degrowth model in relation to a program, the whole institution, its lifeblood, its modus operandi is focused on building a collection. And I've been very involved over the last 20 years in building the international collection and been singularly responsible for a huge growth in the volume of work. And my now directors of the collection, Gregor Muir and Polly Staples, are taking on themselves a review of that kind of behaviour. And what's really interesting is that they are now have put forward, and this has been acknowledged, a strategic shift from acquiring at the volume that we previously acquired at, which was a continuous growth rate, to buying less but more strategically. So, and that will have an impact on the rate of growth of our collection, and it will have an impact on the volume of work, but the volume of transport and of the storage, etc., etc., etc. And within that, at the same time, and I think this is really interesting, and I think, again, reflects some of the things that speakers have said, we are becoming much more conscious of the work that we acquire and have introduced what we're calling an environmental impact assessment, which means that we look at the origin of the work, we look at where it's coming from, we look at how we're going to ship it, we look at its bulk, its weight, its materials, we look at its sustainability, how we will store the work, how impactful it will be to install it, how we will care for it, and all those things are feeding into the decision-making of whether we will acquire a work or not by purchase or by gift. And this is just the beginning of a process that I think is likely to have a huge impact on the nature of the collecting. And just to give you a little bit of sense of that now, is that the acquisitions that I sent out a sort of like a please let me know what you think. The works that people in my team are really excited about acquiring during the last few years have almost no physical presence. So I don't know whether anybody saw the Li Ming Wei performance that we had in the Turbine Hall 4 or 5 weeks ago. An extraordinary performance, long durational, 2-3 dancers all day, every day, over a period of a month. It exists in the collection in the form of a single digital file, or a piece of paper if you prefer. We've also recently bought a work, in fact at Frieze of last year, by a Guatemalan indigenous artist, Edgar Khalil. And I say bought, we have acquired a license, we've acquired custodianship from the originating community of this work for 12 years. So there's a beginnings of rethinking the model of ownership, which I think is very interesting. I mean, I would say that I think the impact of climate emergency and other emergencies is really forcing us as curators to rethink art history and to rethink how we view objects from the past. And I would cite the controversy and activities over the Whistler murals at Tate Britain in the restaurant, which it is simply no longer acceptable to have images, humorous images of young black enslaved children in a public place. And it just is beginning to feel that, you know, in I don't know how many years we are going to challenge how acceptable it will be to have certain materials, you know, extractive materials from the very core of the earth in our galleries. And so having that, we're an institution, a public national museum in perpetuity. We are kind of duty bound to try and do the thinking about what does a sustainable collection for the future look like.
That's fascinating. Thank you, Frances.
Well,
Paul, you run, it's a private museum, but it's a substantial museum, and you've been putting the environment at the centre of your activities for the last decade or so. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about, please, about what Glenstone's been doing, but also how that feeds into your shows. I think your last show was Richard Serra, rather heavy-duty, heavy metal, but on the other hand, I suppose it was going to stick around there and not go anywhere. So if we could talk a little bit about the building and what you've been doing, but then how that feeds in to how you view your artists and your collections as well.
Okay, well, thank you, and I'm honored to be here. Louisa, you're a force, and it's been fun to get to know you the last couple of weeks, and certainly to be on this panel is terrific. I can't stress enough that all of this commitment to the word we're using, sustainability, I actually tell people to throw that word away and never use it again. At Glenstone, we're focused on a different word, which is regeneration, and that's really driven by our director, Emily Rails. She came at this in her most important role, not as our director, but as a mom. Back 12 years ago, she was expecting her first child, and she started to worry about the chemicals that her child might be crawling through, because they live right on the museum grounds. Most of the land, we have about 350 acres now, and the founders do live right on the campus in a piece that's carved off for them. And she said, let's get the pesticides off the property. And then in 2012, Emily authored a vision statement where we were going to be leaders in sustainability and regenerative practices. And when we launched an expansion, because Glenstone opened in 2006, a very, very modest museum with 10,000 feet of exhibit space, we launched an international architecture competition. Thomas Pfeiffer out of New York won the competition, and then Adam Greenspan of Peter Walker Partners designed this landscape in collaboration with Emily and her husband Mitchell Rails, with the overarching goal, let's be as sustainable and regenerative as we possibly can. And that manifested itself in putting the building into the earth. So we literally, in constructing this museum, we took the earth, imagine a 5-acre hole, we say acres in the States, a 5-acre hole 50 feet deep into the ground, so several meters into the ground. You take all that earth, you put it aside, you build your building, which is inherently energy efficient because it's so deep into the earth. And then you put the earth back, you put the fill back, or you use it in other beneficial ways. And then we began to focus on all native species of plants. So we have planted 12,000 plus trees. We have 45 acres of native meadow that literally grow right up onto the roof of the building. And we have been, again, regenerative. We have lots of conversations with the community. And when you look at being regenerative in everything that you do, which is our goal, part of that, it brings into to bear the relationship with the community, the relationship with the governing bodies. So by acquiring all the property, we exist in a residential neighborhood. By acquiring properties, every time we acquire a property and bring it into a nonprofit, we're taking away tax revenue from the government. And some of those people get upset about that. And we have this conversation. Is the world better off with Glenstone preserving this land and sharing its art? Or is it better to have a McMansion with a big driveway and a big roof? What's better? Now, the politicians would like to have the tax dollars, and we are constantly making the case through educational efforts and focusing on sustainability and trying to inspire people. So that's what we do. You asked about our most recent collection, and I know in your introduction we've had references to concrete being a bad thing. And we look at it a little bit differently. We take the amortization schedule, if you will. Concrete is at least a 100-year structure, maybe more, right? So if you take the energy involved in making the concrete in year one, it looks like it's not sustainable. But if you think about the fact that that concrete structure around the Richard Serra sculpture called 4 Rounds, which we just opened about a month ago, if you think about the fact that that steel and that concrete will still be there 100 years from now and require very, very little maintenance. We won't have to paint it. We won't have to do lots of things that you have to do to typical structures. And we are not heating and cooling that exhibit at all. So if it's cold outside, it's cold in the exhibit. We actually think it's going to be one of the more sustainable exhibits in our collection. We also copy the Tate, and we've been doing this for a very long time, since the beginning of our existence in 2006. Our exhibits are typically up for a year or more. And in fact, in the pavilions, which is the energy efficient building I described, we have 7 permanent exhibitions. I think it's 7, it might be 8 permanent exhibitions. And then we do have some rotating galleries, but the exhibitions are in there for a very, very long time. So really, when you look at sustainability in literally everything you do, I think great things happen. And I think a lot of people leave inspired. We do a lot of visitor polls, and we're finding that even though we're a modern art museum, more people come to Glenstone because they're inspired by nature and architecture than they do from the art, in fact. So we're super excited about that, super excited to be a resource for this community and to share information. And again, thank you.
We'll be talking more in a minute, absolutely. I want to drill down a bit into this notion of sustainability and regeneration, and the fact that you don't use the S word at Glenstone, and also about the materials and about considering the environment when you actually acquire. But on my left now, I have a real acquirer here, David Roberts. Now, obviously, you own a lot of material artworks, but also a lot of your works are actually immaterial. You do promote performance work, you do promote impermanent work, but whether it's in the kind of impermanence or indeed in the actual structures of your organisation, the environment has become increasingly important, hasn't it? I mean, you were saying that when you're considering in your property business environmental aspects, you then thought this has got to also filter straight into what I'm doing as well.
Well, it's much easier in the property business, dare I say, because there's in the art world, there's no real guidelines. I mean, everybody's...
GCC?
No, but I mean, everybody that's been speaking has been quite inspirational, because they've been talking about doing all sorts of things which will affect their carbon footprint of their organisation or individually, and that's all to the good. But there's many aspects of the art industry where we haven't really touched upon, about the number of flights and the number of art fairs and all the various things that go on. And there's no real guidelines from any single organisation which is being paid attention to and aspired to. There's no sort of gold standard. It's much easier to some extent in the real estate business, because we manage and we own various properties. And there's now very much a movement to get an ESG audit, which really means that every property needs to be audited, your organisation needs to be audited, and ultimately it's very difficult to get new work, to get appointments from institutions, unless they can see that you've ticked a lot of boxes. And at the moment, I think in the art world, we are quite rightly, and as I say, it is inspiring to know that people are individually trying to tick their own boxes in different ways. But there's no big guidelines. And there's certainly no sense that if someone doesn't do something, that they're really going to be penalised for it. And I think that needs to happen. I think there needs to be some kind of standard set up which people either can adhere to or at least aim to adhere to within a certain period of time. And we're going to have to look at that in a big sense over the whole industry. I mean, at the moment, I don't know if one puts an exhibition on somewhere, the specific carbon footprint of that compared to an art fair. I don't know how much of the carbon footprint of the art world is just down to flying. It might be a surprise, and actually it's not, it's something else. But I don't really know.
You see, I guess with the GCC, we're trying to get people to put their carbon onto the website, and then the chunk of the pie chart clearly shows, and then hopefully they have a proper audit in more granular detail. But then, you know, next year, that chunk would have got smaller.
Yes.
What we didn't want to do was wag a finger. Basically, fly less. Don't have a private jet. I've had to get rid of mine. You know, but you know, there are certain things that are a big no-no, and also there's going to be a lot more talk about this after the break, about the practical nitty-gritty, about what you can do. But I think it's a very spooked, easily spooked sector. And you don't want to frighten the horses. You know, you want to tell people they've got the resources to then judge what they're going to do. You were talking to me very interestingly because collectors often want it by yesterday. An earlier panel, Johanna was talking about, you know, fast and cheap. You know, want it fast, you want it less, you want it now. And you were saying that actually as a collector, you don't care when you get your stuff. You don't mind if it goes.
Absolutely
Talk a little about that, because I think slow is the new fast, basically. And there's been lots more about that after the break. But you're living incarnation of someone who's actually said it, and I'm publicly holding him to account. He doesn't mind when he gets it. Provided he gets it.
I think most collectors, if they get a work, whether it's in 2 days or 2 weeks or 2 months, it doesn't really matter. And I'd flip that on its head. I actually think it's up to galleries, because artists certainly seem to be wanting it to happen. I think it's up to galleries to dictate to collectors and be able to say to them, you know what, it's going to go by ship, you're going to get it in 6 weeks' time, don't worry, it's on its way. I don't think anyone's really going to have a major problem with that. I certainly wouldn't.
Competitive businesses, it's very interesting. I think we're going to talk more about this. I just want to give Anna a moment because she's been patiently waiting. I mean, I think it's very interesting that you're not in the art world, but you've had a lot of interface with the art world recently with ClientEarth, and it's been very interesting. Obviously, a lot of dosh has been raised by collectors and gallerists and artists, but also quite a lot of your key intersections with the music industry, with other industries and sectors, involve people who collect art as well. And it'd be nice to have you, as somebody from a really effective environmental organisation, talking about what art collectors do, because there's not that many of them in the whole kind of global mass, but they can have a hell of a lot of leverage.
Yeah, for sure. Can you hear me? Yeah. Great. And I think, first of all, I was thinking when I was coming up on the train here, what is the link between sustainability and then this kind of system change stuff that we do? I think sustainability comes from a beautiful place, this kind of trying to make sure that what you do doesn't impact other people negatively. And when you're looking at sustainability, we've heard everybody talking about trying to reduce their own carbon footprint or reduce their own business's reliance on fossil fuels. I guess you get to a certain point in that, and like you were saying, Francis, you get to a point where you're like, that's it, we're at the limit, this is as much as we can do. And then everybody gets to this sort of fairly terrifying question of, like, how the hell are we going to scale this up over the whole planet? And everybody singing from the same hymn sheet.
Yeah, but we are talking emergency, exactly.
Right,
we can't just sit around on podiums forever talking about it,
And then that is that whole society stuff, that systems change stuff is what ClientEarth does, using global series of lawyers, using environmental law, business law, a lot of corporate law, redirecting financial flows, for example. Fossil fuels are now, it's more cost effective to have renewable energy, but fossil fuels are so heavily subsidised by government's money. So we kind of put a lot of legislation and pressure, etc., into impacting those financial flows. And I guess that's our kind of answer to what happens. How do you scale this up? How do you make the systems change? And my role is specifically based on how can the arts contribute to systems change and move beyond sustainability and then sustainability plus. And yeah, you're a beautifully leading question, thank you. The example of the auction series, which the GCC have put in place over the last, since October, we've had 5 major works by major contemporary artists in Christie's auction house, and as you said, we've raised a bit over 5.5 million now, I think, and that's obviously galleries, Hauser and Wirth, white cube, GCC, all the artists, of course, involved, but just to kind of talk quickly, really quickly, about the impact of a couple of those auctions.
We've got time.
So first off, we sold a Cecily Brown work, or Christie sold a Cecily Brown work on our behalf, and that work has funded 2 or potentially 3 new lawyers in Asia. I think it's going to end up being 3 new lawyers in Asia. Asia is one of the only place in the world where routinely coal-fired power plants are still being built and planned. ClientEarth has shut down a generation of coal plants in Europe, and the idea is we'll do the same in Asia. And then the Hauser and Wirth artist, Rashid Johnson, who seems to be the world's most generous man, gave us a painting as well, which we auctioned off, and we doubled the staff number in the US. We went from 2 people to now 5 people. We have a new head lawyer there, and our first greenwashing case against a gas major launches next week, or week after next.
And you do corporate law, don't you, in America?
Yeah,
so regardless of what crazy person is in charge,
exactly.
If you take the corporations to law, it doesn't affect what government change there is.
Yes, exactly, yeah. And so I guess if you look at, I mean, that's a long-winded way of kind of describing what collectors can do, but I guess for those 5 collectors with those 5 works now in their collection, that's got to be the ultimate kind of climate positive, never mind carbon neutral work.
But of course, not wishing in any way to decry the generosity of collectors coughing up over 5.5 million, but that's not your golden ticket then, just to go back and get in your private jet and bomb off. And I mean, I'm interested in obviously multi-stranded change. And I mean, Francis, from what you're saying, I mean, that's a bit of a provocative black and white question, but I mean, if there is an amazing, gorgeous, great big bronze sculpture, or a great big Cortensian sculpture, or indeed some great big, amazing cast concrete piece of gorgeousness, would that really now mitigate against you thinking about it? If it was, a work that you might 15 years ago have thought of buying, do you now go, think of all that? I mean, you see, Paul would say very differently. He'd say it doesn't need climate change, it doesn't need special environmental control, it can be rained on, it can be
I think
whatever.
we are very,
it's a bit basic, but I think let's get basic.
A public institution is very different from a private institution. The idea that we could put a Sarah in our gallery and leave it there for 100 years is just not on.
No.
We have a very large collection, and we are hardwired to share the collection because it's in public ownership. So we do have to circulate it. And we cannot acquire work that then just sits in a storage in perpetuity. So the complex calculation would be, how important is this in our view? How compelling would it be for our audiences over the next 100 years? What it would be the cost and impact of shipping it and keeping it in storage. And so it would be a complex calculation, but it was a work that was so transformative that we felt it was, we could not go ahead and tell the story of now without it. I think we would probably forego the acquisition. And it breaks my heart, but I personally worked on really some extraordinary acquisitions in the noughties and tens, which have still not yet been seen, and are unlikely to go on display in the next few years. So, ironically, we're a public institution, but we're privatizing public work by not being able to show it. So it's a complex equation, but it's that intersection of the things that come together in making really tough decisions.
I mean, Paul, with the director, with Emily Rales, I mean, yes, of course, it was great that she objected to the pesticides. It's fantastic that you're now planting indigenous plants. You've got an environmental education facility. You've got all these incredible things. You're underground, so you don't have to worry about the temperature changes so much. But nonetheless, you are there primarily to house and show art. So how does considering the artist and indeed the artwork feed into acquisitions policy and collecting? I mean, is this now when the curators are thinking to acquire work? How many works are you scaling down the number? What are the environmental kind of concerns in the works that you're acquiring for this amazing, sustainable, or do we now say regenerative environment?
So I said to you when we met, I think that sustainability in art collecting is sort of the holy grail of the whole industry. We can plant trees and we can do lots, but then you do hit that threshold that we've heard about, how much more can you do? Glenstone is beginning to have those kinds of conversations and the curators, the collectors, but the thing that we've been doing almost from the beginning is, and it's not earth-shattering, it's common sense, is just recycling literally every possible thing that we can. So we did a Wirth exhibit, and we had his studio that he built inside our gallery, and every bit of that was donated to an organization called Second Chance out of Baltimore, Maryland, and so we reuse 2x4s, we reuse gypsum, we reuse every possible thing that we can, and we are now beginning to have these kinds of conversations that we've been hearing about all morning. I can't say that we're an industry leader in that regard, but I can tell you that it's part of our conversations now that we are looking at very, very strongly in terms of acquisition. The other part of that, when you look at sustainability and regeneration and everything you do, I can tell you that we are looking in terms of our collection strategy, making sure that our collection strategy is representative. It's coming from all walks of life, all corners of the earth, and making sure that it's not white European men or white American men who are generating the art that's on exhibit. So we have very visibly changed that strategy, which is a sustainability initiative of its own in terms of sustaining all corners of the art world equitably.
And of course, social justice, the environment, all these things are utterly interconnected. I'm just quite curious about whether there actually is a kind of conversation when you're going to have an artist exhibition or with your curators in the actual acquisition, because we're talking about, and I imagine you have a lot of work in storage as well, or do you not? Do you have a policy of lending stuff that's not in storage? Because I think that was interesting what Frances was saying, that some of the works that she's fought tooth and nail to acquire haven't been properly shown yet, because it's just, obviously Tate's very different, it's a vast collection, but do you have that kind of idea where you want the work to be regenerative in a way of regenerating new interest across the board and new communications and connections as well?
Yeah, so we keep metrics on how often each piece of artwork has been shown. Basically, we don't want it to be in storage for any more than 10 years at a time. We do have a significant number of objects, so that's a bit of a challenge, but we have a very, very aggressive lending schedule, and we don't say no very often, frankly. And we try to accommodate, and the emerging conversation is, okay, how are we going to ship it? Does it need to have a curator or someone go with the art? And we are looking at those things very, very closely now. But really, we believe art is essential to life. We think it's the great human differentiator. And so we're here, we exist as an organization to share that art, because we do believe that is a regenerative thing of its own. It moves people. And we see those reactions every day.
So we're talking spiritually rather than environmentally in this case?
Yes, but I think it's starting to go both ways.
Okay. David, I mean, you've got a lot of stuff already.
Yeah.
I mean, are you thinking of, are you changing the way in which you acquire your stuff, or thinking about changing those kind of views, or do you consider things differently now when you're thinking of work that you might want to acquire? It's storage, how's the environment kind of fed into the actual owning of art and acquiring of art with you? Or has it not? Are you a bit like Paul saying, it feeds my soul, that's regenerative?
I'm probably more on Paul's side than Francis's side, I think, because
you can.
No, we're on the same side, but I just mean in the sense that, you are a public institution, and we can, within reason, do what we like. And
really?
Well, sort of.
We're all going to die when the sea rises.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think there's certain works of art that, depending on what materials they're made from, we might take a different view than we used to. We do store a lot of art. We do have a program, however, where we lend a lot of art, and we're always very keen to lend art. So there's a program where we're lending works to museums and shows all the time, because we don't want things to be in the warehouse if we can possibly help it. I think I don't want to go off piece, but
go off piece, it's fine.
No, but my problem.
I'll bring you back when you've been
my problem in terms of what I collect or what the collection buys now, tends to be more focused on the nature of the artist and what they think, rather than the materials that the things are made from. And we do take a very long-term view. We want to buy art that we think is sustainable over a long period of time. But
now, you're not a great one for the resale, are you, really?
No, definitely not. But my concern at the moment in terms of sustainability is the sort of woke world we live in, and whether I'm allowed to buy an artist or not, or whether I go against what other people say and buy something by an artist who may have political views that aren't very popular at the moment. And that, to be honest, is affecting what we think should go into the collection much more than the materials themselves.
Interesting. But also I think it's interesting about what you were saying earlier about being the one who can lobby the galleries. It's the collectors, it's the artists. You know, you are there. And I mean, in a way, we've already flagged up with ClientEarth what kind of leverage collectors can have in money power, but also in terms of stating the claims. If the collectors and the artists united, the market would fall into place, and the supply chains to a great extent would fall into place, because you're the guys who be buying the services and buying the art.
Well, I think as a collector, we can make a statement saying that we are delighted if things are shipped by sea rather than by air, which we are. And many collectors could do that. But I still think the initiative has to come from galleries, particularly big galleries. I think if they initiate a policy that says this is what we're going to do, then it goes the other way around then. They're going to call out the collectors. Because if any collector then says, no, I want mine delivered by air, it's them that's making a statement which is unsustainable.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain artworks, obviously, that probably would always have to go by air if they're neon or ceramics or something like that for the time being, but maybe not. I mean, Francis, as the director of a major museum, that also has to attract audiences as well. You know, you've got to balance up all these different considerations. You know, you're a kind of ecosystem in your own right, in all senses, economical, political, social, cultural. And obviously, you know, the way in which you shape your collections and view it are very much about that. But also you have your audiences to consider as well, both global tourism and local Southwark, in your case.
Well, I think the focus increasingly is in terms of physical audiences, is increasingly on the local London and regional audiences close to London. Because as digital becomes more powerful, it can be a huge and potent attractor of a global audience. And you can do very exciting things digitally, and that is growing and developing day by day. But I think at the same time that digital becomes ever present, the physical presence and being in contact with your local gallery becomes more and more important. And as private space diminishes day by day in London, Tate Modern in our neighbourhood is it's the park.
Yeah.
It's the library. It's the playground. So we have multiple responsibilities and functions, I think, that we didn't perhaps have 10, 20 years ago.
And of course, Tate Modern, you have, of course, you're public, the private sector is different, but of course you're constantly dealing with private collectors as patrons, as sponsors, as philanthropists, as lenders to exhibitions, etc., and also commercial galleries as well, supporting exhibitions, artists and galleries. What do you feel the role of the collector could be, the role of the private collector? Of course, there's many collectors as there are artists. They're all distinct individuals. They have their quirks, their peccadillos, their eccentricities, etc. But as a mass, as we discussed, they can be incredibly powerful. So what message would you want to give to the collectors out there as to what they could do in terms of sustainability?
Well, I don't know who takes the lead on this, but I think if we, across the collecting community, so that includes commercial galleries, auction houses, collectors and museums, if we could all agree to collectively review the very rigorous and stringent conditions we put on the transport and display of work of art, from insisting that physical couriers accompany works by air, insisting on absolutely unbelievably precise temperature and humidity controls in the galleries. If we could all hold hands and say we can bring these back to some kind of realistic level. I mean, I'm reminded endlessly that when Tate opened in 1897, it did without any heating or air conditioning. It did it without any electric lighting. And it was received brilliantly by public and politicians and collectors. And that we have lost something. And if we could pull back from that rigour, it would have a transformative impact on our carbon emissions, I think, and our costs. And when the public purse diminishes year on year, we could save a little bit of money. We could put it into community activities.
Oh, spontaneous applause. Spontaneous applause. Paul, would you recommend that to Mitchell and Emily at Glenstone? That there was some kind of, I mean, what you're sort of implying is a kind of, almost like a kind of charter in a way, a sort of, a memorandum of understanding that's actually written down in black and white. David was asking for, some kind of specifications.
Yeah, definitely.
Would you endorse that?
I would, and we do. It feels like we do a lot of these things already. We have very loose thresholds, and we talk to the conservatives all the time. So we allow for wide spans of humidity and temperature controls, and we feel like we're pretty well ahead of the game. I can tell you that Glenstone, one of our claims to fame is that we let artists rule the day. We exist to serve artists as much as anything. And I think the artists themselves, if they go to Emily Rales and say, I want to have the most energy efficient exhibit, if possible, someone like Pipilotti, her name carries a lot of weight. That's the kind of thing that people like Emily and Mitchell Rales and others will really listen to, is what do the artists want? We allowed Richard Serra and his team to roam Glenstone's 350 acres and decide where they wanted the exhibit to be. And to the degree that we can accommodate people, that's what we try to do. So I encourage the artists to continue to take the lead. I love the initiative Artists Commit. When I heard about it, I was very, very excited. I applaud everybody who started that and some of the folks from the first panel. I really, the collectors will, in our case, will follow the lead of the artists.
We just have to hope the artists are also being environmentally sustainable. I mean, if you had an artist that you loved who wanted to do something really quite problematic environmentally, would you then go, actually, do you know what? Well, you could, but you could make a contribution to ClientEarth to compensate for that. I mean, would that apply the other way round to artists if they do something that is not so gorgeous?
Yeah, I mean, I can't, honestly, I'm not involved in those kinds of conversations and decisions. I just know that those conversations are ongoing all the time. And we as an operations team that I'm on, we're just constantly drilling down to how we can do this the most energy efficient way possible. And I can think of one exhibit in the past, and I'm certainly not going to name any names, where we might have done better. But in general, I think we do pretty well. But everybody can always do better, and I applaud the idea of industry-wide standards and the reporting. Mr. Rales likes to say that you can't manage what you don't measure. And so if we continue to get metrics on all of these things and we do the carbon mapping, that will drive a lot of conversations.
Yeah, I think information is absolutely key. So I'm just going to do a quick takeaway just before we break for our drink. So just a couple of things that each of you think would be effective just to have maybe things we've discussed already, but just as a takeaway, something that could be implemented now in collecting and acquiring to make a real difference. I started with you, Francis, so I'm going to end with you being the first in the firing line. What do you feel now would be an effective thing for collectors and collections to be considering?
I think doing less. I mean, I think collect less, build less, expand less. Yeah, simple as that. I mean, I think we can do everything to reduce our carbon footprint, but if we grow, we can't. So I think it just needs to be a slowing down. Yeah.
That sounds good. Bit of a spontaneous applause there. What about you? I mean, you're outside the art world, but you know a lot of collectors. You've got collectors in all different branches of your organisation. Sure. What do you feel they should do? What can they do to make a difference now?
I guess, and this probably goes for everyone in the art world, be aware of the role you have in changing norms and your own behavioural change, how that has an impact. I think, and this is also true of music and film and everything, people always say, oh, it's the directors, or the power lies with the producers, or ultimately it's down to the catering team, etc. I think that moment is past in which we can say it's somebody else, and we have to say, what can I do? What is the best thing that I can do at this moment? And also, it's a fantastic aspiration for there to be the kind of regulations, etc., that exist that David was talking about, which exist in building. But before they do, you can't just wait for them to come in place. So, yeah, I think that's
don't sit back, be proactive, not reactive. Yeah. Paul, any takeaways from across the Atlantic?
I would do exactly what you're doing right now with this event, which is to communicate, to network, and then to educate. I think if we continue to have these dialogues, just so much has happened just since 2019. We've been at this for 12 years, and I felt like, I think I was the only chief sustainability officer in the art world. And now all of a sudden, this industry is really catching up to the conversation. So I think continuing to do this, continuing to drive, continuing to inform and inspire.
Inform, inspire, and act. David, last word. What do you think should happen? I mean, you can repeat what you said or whatever.
No. Just as much as possible, try and stay local. We've, when we send a work somewhere now, we try and send it without someone accompanying it. We try and get local technicians to install it rather than have people travel there. And I think it's all about trying to stop people traveling as much as we can when it's unnecessary.
Perfect. Stay local. Well, not all of you on the Zoom and all across the live stream internationally, you're not local, but you're kind of local in our bubble. But we're now going to stop for a half-an-hour break in our locality here and come back again in half an hour. But thank you all very much. Go and get hydrated. So back we are after our break, fully hydrated, I hope, and 2 more panels to go, and lots of really good stuff happening here. Our third panel, we're really going to get down to the nitty-gritty now. The third panel is galleries taking action. I mean, what practical steps can galleries take to make a difference? Try and speak, Louisa. And what have they been doing to date, and what now needs to be done? I mean, these are really important questions. What services and resources can they access? We've done lots of talk, and some great things have emerged, but now we're really talking about specific actions. So to help answer these questions and many more, the panel's been co-hosted by Keith Lowndes, Managing Director of the international charity, we just had a mention or two, Gallery Climate Coalition, and also Caitlin Southwick, fantastic to see her, the founder and executive director of KiCulture, the international not-for-profit, which is working across all standards, all strands of the sector to unite culture and sustainability. And they're joined by Tate MacGarry, the wonderful Tate MacGarry, director of Tate MacGarry Gallery, and also a founding director of GCC, and also Clona Murphy, who is the head of environmental sustainability here at Hauser and Wirth, who's been mentioned quite a lot because you've been such a pioneer in this field. So they're all going to be talking about this. I'm sitting back, and we're going to start with Caitlin, who's going to introduce, and then the discussion will unfold. Over to you, Caitlin.
Thank you so much, Louise. Hi, everyone. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to stand. I just prefer being, up here and being able to see you guys. So thank you so much for having me today. I'm absolutely honored to be here. It's just so inspirational to see people coming together, like-minded individuals, to unite in this. And we've heard this morning from many of my colleagues from around the world this idea of pact and what an inspiration it is to really focus on collaboration. And I think that that's the most exciting thing about this movement, is that there's no such thing as competition here. We're all in this together. We have a common goal, and we're all working collectively and collaboratively towards it. And that's really the ethos about what I do as well. So I think I have control over here. Perfect, fantastic. So I wanted to just take a few minutes before we dive into our panel discussion to introduce myself properly and tell you a little bit about what we do at KiCulture, and specifically our program, KiFutures. I am a conservator. Please do not be mad at me for that. I know that we're the ones who, tell you that you have to keep the climate control at 19 plus or minus 1 and the relative humidity at 65 plus or minus 2 globally, all seasons around. I'm sorry about that. And actually the big problem here is that we in the conservation field already have all of the scientific data needed in order to make that transition that Francis was talking about earlier to less rigid standards. But the problem is we're not communicating about it. So this is me as a conservator. I'm over here on, I guess it's your guys' left, and I was part of the first team of conservators to go down to Rapa Nui and work on the Moai statues, which I don't have to tell you was an unbelievable experience. But as you can see, we are wrapping the entire head of the Moai in plastic wrap. We would spray it with biocides, toxic biocides, wrap it in plastic, and then unwrap it 15 minutes later, do the treatment again. Very wasteful. This is me over here on your right, covered in personal protective equipment because the chemicals that I'm spraying onto this beautiful statue are so toxic that if they get into my eyes, I could go blind. I'm from Colorado. I'm a mountain girl. Needless to say, I love this beautiful planet we live on. So the way that my job was being conducted just churned my stomach. And I thought there has to be a better way to do this. The question, of course, is how? When I was a conservator, I wanted someone to literally just hand me a book and tell me, like, this is how you can be sustainable. So I didn't have any resources, I didn't have any support. Actually, when I first started this whole journey, I was a master's student with no, any sort of agency or decision-making power, and I felt completely alone and helpless. So I didn't see anyone else doing it at the time. This is before I met Heath. This is before I met all of you. And so I went out and decided to do it myself. So we wrote the Key Books. I started my nonprofit in November of 2019 to really help unite the cultural sector with this idea of sustainability so that I would be the last person that ever felt that alone and that helpless in this journey that we're going on together. So we started with developing the Key Books, which are step-by-step guides on how to be sustainable. What makes these unique is that they are co-written by sustainability experts and cultural professionals. So we really slash through all of the sustainability jargon to find solutions that are really applicable for us as cultural professionals. They're freely available to download from our website. If you haven't checked them out yet, please do so. Our first 3 last year that we launched were energy, social sustainability, and materials. And this year we have 3 more coming out, including education and engagement, exhibitions, and sustainable tourism. But it's all nice and good to have a handbook to tell you what to do, but sometimes that just tends to sit on your desk and pile up, and even if you are engaged with looking through the actions, at some point you have a question, or you have an obstacle, or you need some extra support. So this is why we developed the Key Futures program. The Key Futures program was piloted last year. We have some of our members here, so really excited to see you guys. And then we launched officially in January of this year. And the idea is to create an international community of active, forward-thinking individuals within the cultural sector and institutions and companies and organizations to really look at a holistic and international approach for how we, as the cultural sector, can tackle sustainability. I always like to say that sustainability, it's not top down, it's not bottom up, it's not inside out, it's not outside in, it's all of these things. I kind of do this when I talk about sustainability because it has to come from all angles simultaneously. We need to be looking at solutions from a sectoral, holistic way. So it has to be a conversation that all stakeholders are involved with. And we're talking about this a little bit this morning as well when we were looking at, the conservators are the problem here when we're talking about climate control. Yes, we are, but they need to be invited to the table. So whose responsibility is this? This is a really interesting research that was put together by the Getty about why this conversation wasn't happening. The conservators say, well, it's the museum directors that need to make this decision. The museum directors say, well, it's the insurance companies and our loan agreements that prohibit us from making this change. And the insurance companies say, well, we listen to the conservators, so if they tell us we can change it, then it's fine. It's just a matter of communication. So really what we need to be doing here is looking at educating ourselves and communicating, breaking down these silos between different parts of the field, but also breaking down language barriers and geographical barriers to look at this from an international perspective and learn from each other across the globe. So KiCulture is composed of various components. It's mainly, as I mentioned, a coaching and training program. So all of our participants join us for weekly training sessions. They're online and they're global. So we have people joining us from Australia and from Kenya and Nigeria and Brazil and Argentina and all over North America and all over Europe to learn about sustainability. And it's your 1 hour a week where you can sit down and start gathering those critical thinking skills that you can then take back and apply to your own situation. In addition, we provide local support through our key coaches, who are local sustainability and cultural experts who can talk to you in your own language, who can provide the partnerships and the answers that you need for looking at how local solutions can be implemented, and create and facilitate regional networks so that you can work with other organizations in your area. And really the idea behind this whole process is to create this community and provide peer-to-peer learning platforms and streamline sharing best practices. So as I mentioned, these are some of our amazing key coaches, and we have Kim Craxton, who also works with the GCC, Charlotte Perotti, who's also part of PACT. So it's really amazing how this community is really building and always coming together. But it's about making sustainability accessible, and it's about making sustainability sustainable. We really believe that the way that sustainability is encountered right now, especially in the cultural sector, if you have a consultant come in, for example, they may work with kind of the C-suite and upper management to reduce carbon footprints, but that doesn't get to the conservators. That doesn't get to the curators. That doesn't get to the registrars. So how can we make this both top-down and bottom-up at the same time? And it's by engaging with every single person in your organization. So this is how we approach this within the KiCulture program. I just wanted to give a couple of very quick examples of some of the things that we've been able to accomplish. The Mary Rose Trust is one of our participants, and I was on a call with one of our champions from the Mary Rose. It was on Tuesday, and she was telling me that we had this HVAC system conversation and climate control and all of those things. So in their previous meeting with their facilities director, they were talking about HVAC fan speeds. Now, if you adjust the fan speed at night of your climate control system and you turn it down, you can save a lot of energy, and it doesn't affect your climate control. Being an archaeological wet wood museum, it's really important for them to have good climate control. But they were able to implement this, and simply by making that change and switching down that fan speed at night, they saved 3,000 pounds a month on their energy bill. So we have some big impact things here. All right, I don't want to talk too much because I want to get to the conversation, so I will leave some of our other examples for during the panel session. These are just some of our participants who are joining. As I mentioned, it's a really amazing international group, from the National Museum of Lagos in Nigeria to the Museo Moderno in Buenos Aires, the Smithsonian, the European Theater Convention. So really looking at how we can all be engaged with this. And also we're starting to break into universities, because education starts at the university level. So I'm really excited and look forward to telling you guys more about that program. But what I would love to encourage everyone to do, I always say that sustainability, it's a way of thinking. It's a lens. It's a pair of sunglasses. So it's the way that we view the world, and we have to start looking at it through this lens of sustainability, because every single one of us has a huge responsibility towards this and can make such a big difference. If we just start looking at every single thing that we do with this sustainability lens on, then we're going to go really far together. So the future is now. Put in your glasses, and I'd love to hand over to Heath.
Hi everyone, good to see you all. Thanks to Hauser and Wirth for hosting us today, really appreciate it. Like Caitlin, I'm also going to do a brief introduction about our initiative, but forgive me if I stay sitting down. I don't have as much energy as Caitlin. Yeah, impressive. So hopefully quite a few of you will already know a bit about GCC, so it won't be news to all of you, but we have progressed quite a lot in the last 2 years, so it's good to reinforce and share some of our updates and our vision for the future. We really only have 10 minutes, so I'm going to whiz through, so excuse me if I am rushing a little bit. But if you don't know already, GCC is an international charity and a membership organization, and we provide environmental sustainability and environmental responsibility guidelines to the art sector. Our primary goal is to facilitate a reduction of the sector's greenhouse gas emissions by a minimum of 50% by 2030, based on a COVID year, so 2019. Our strategy for this decarbonisation is to align an international network of members with standardised and actionable guidelines. This is really about practical steps. It's about collaboration. It's about coming together. It's about tangible action. No more time for chat. It's time for action. Membership is completely free, and we're open to everyone within the sector. So when we launched in October 2020, our ambitions really were just to make the London commercial gallery community more sustainable. But a couple of weeks after that launch, we realized that the demand for these resources and the interest in this topic went far beyond London and the commercial gallery. So we quite quickly changed tact and expanded our scope and our ambitions. And our membership is now over 800 members from around the world, 20 countries and 5 continents. And as you can see here, we have quite a good spread of those different components of the sector. And we strive to provide specific and up-to-date and science-based resources for all of those components. We are an international organisation. We have fantastic volunteer teams who work across the globe to localise our resources and our guidelines to their territories. There's a lot of variation in law, in energy grids, in suppliers, and the responsibility of these teams is to localise the information and make it appropriate to their context. We have amazing, generous, just the most impressive teams who, on top of their full-time jobs and through a pandemic, have put together these communities in their local cities, and in the case of Italy, their countries as well. And we also have a couple more in the pipeline, Taiwan and New York opening soon, so that's really exciting for us. As I said at the beginning, our primary target is a 50% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, and that is obviously based on the UN's IPCC guidelines that were set at the Paris Agreement. We're also working towards zero waste operations by 2030. So everything we do is based on those really clear targets. And when registering, all of our members agree to support those targets and implement the changes necessary within their own operations. We do quite a lot, but everything can sort of be simmered down to 3 main categories. And because we're pushed for time, I'm only really going to speak about the first one and touch on the second 2. But firstly, we provide the sector-specific decarbonisation and environmental sustainability guidance for galleries and artists, institutions, and art sector businesses. In the next few slides, I can go into details. But lobbying for systemic change is something we're doing increasingly, and in the last couple of months, we've launched our first sector-wide campaign, which is the Sustainable Shipping Campaign, and I think we're going to hear a lot about that in the next panel. But we're really trying to use that collective influence of 800 plus international members to leverage greater change across the sector. By aligning everyone to the same targets, the same ecological language, the same motivations, we can work together to create that bigger change that isn't possible as individuals. Finally, something we've already talked about earlier in a few different points is raising funds from within the art market to support frontline initiatives. At GCC, we're tightening up the operations of the art world, we're making it more efficient, and we're getting rid of waste. But we're not fighting climate crisis on the front line. And one of our key operations is to take funds from the art market and put them in the hands of amazing organizations. And we do that a couple of different ways. We as we've talked about already today, we had an auction series, a partnership with Christie's to raise funds for ClientEarth. But we also have our strategic climate fund scheme, which is our alternative to offsetting. We don't advise any of our members to offset, but we have an alternative that we think is much better. And to qualify for those funds, we look for organizations who are effectively keeping fossil fuels in the ground, greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere, protecting natural environments, their biodiversity and their human inhabitants, and doing that effectively within that 2030 timeline. So tree planting is very good, but it takes up to 40 years to sequester carbon. We're talking about 8 years, less. So we've heard from Isla from ClientEarth, and we've also heard from Haley from Art to Acres, and those are 2 of our selected FCF scheme funds. More information about all of that on the website. The nuts and bolts of the GCC guidelines and our website is focused on providing tangible, action-based guidelines on the key topics. And shipping, travel, and energy, as you'll see in a moment, are the main sources of carbon emissions in the sector. There's also packaging, materials, circularity, waste and recycling, which are very important to address and don't necessarily come up in your footprint as such a strong issue, but they have their own environmental impacts that can't be ignored. So to David's point earlier, yes, there should be stringent government-based legislation that is enforcing these guidelines with the law, which other sectors have. We don't have that. So in the absence of that, this is our answer to that, and hopefully there'll be legal requirements in place in the near future. We've just secured some funding to expand our resources, and we are developing very in-depth guidelines on exhibition production from start to finish, best practice, and then also artist materials and production processes. So we're really excited about working on those projects in the near future. Anyone familiar with the GCC will know about our decarbonisation action plan. This is probably the most in-depth and comprehensive resource that we offer. It's at the heart of it is a 10-step process that will get anyone, we hope, in the sector from a starting point to their ultimate reduction targets in 2030. And again, don't have time to go into this, but the first two are really important, and I just want to emphasize them, is start a green team within your organization. If you're a small team, a green ambassador, and really creating a culture of climate consciousness and delegating responsibility and building confidence in the team around these topics is the most important first step in this journey. Once you've done that, you can more effectively measure emissions, which, as we've heard today, what you don't measure, you can't manage. It's really one of the most important steps in this journey. And if you do those first two, the pathway is unlocked and you're right on the track to reaching targets already. We have a unique carbon calculator tool, which is available on our website for free. It's custom built for the art world and designed for galleries and institutions and galleries and artists. It's very simple to use. Collecting the data is the hard part, and we know that, and we're trying to break down those obstacles to make it easier. But once you have your data, it's very simple to fill it in and very quickly get an accurate average estimate of your emissions. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit in our discussion. Once you've completed your report and submit it to us, we encourage all of our members to publish it on our website and on their website. And that's really a really important step to create this sense of collegiality and transparency and sharing and just acknowledging that you have impacts and you're working towards reducing it. So thank you to both Hauser and Kate for publishing their results. So I think that's probably about time. So this is a good segue into our conversation. I think, as we've seen, you guys have gone through the process of measuring emissions. And as I said, that's an essential step towards decarbonisation. I think to kick off the discussion, it would be great to hear from both Cleona and Kate about your experiences of measuring and some of the key insights and takeaways you've had from that experience. And Kate, maybe we could start with you.
Yeah, just put my glasses on to look at me, remind myself. Yeah, well, for me, a really big one was travel. I mean, we set out with the GCC. We all got together in lockdown. I'd had this sort of burning sort of desire to do something, to look at my business, and I could see other businesses, commercial businesses, doing something about sustainability, and I just felt like we didn't have the tools in the art world. So I think that's where the GCC came from, just to reiterate that. So we were advised by a very good environmental designer, environmentalist Danny Chivers, to measure our carbon footprint. So that was the starting point. So that's what we did. It was I didn't really know what was going to come out, So to get that 45%, I think it was, travel was really interesting. From that 45%, I think that was 3 long-haul flights and 7 short-haul flights. So I realised, well, if our target is 50% by 2030, actually I can pretty much cut it down to 50% now if I don't fly. So that's just as an example of how flying had really a big impact on my numbers. So we sort of, I'd already was sort of like quite up for the challenge of seeing, can I run this business without being everywhere? Turns out you can. I haven't been anywhere much apart from on trains since COVID, since 2019. business is good. So, I can't stick with that forever, and I like to go places, but it was just really interesting to measure. There are other areas which are more challenging. So shipping, Heath and the GCC are doing great work on that, but it's not quite as straightforward. And we're good to hear from David earlier about collectors and shipping by sea. That's another big area we need to conquer. David, please do say something, because we all need to say it. As well as galleries, it's great to hear you as a collector here today saying, yes, I'll ship by sea. And if we can get your voice out there further than here, then brilliant, because you'll be influential on other collectors. I don't want to go on too much.
So I think our approach has been similar and different because of the scale of our organisation. We started in 2019 calculating our emissions in scope 1 and 2, and then soon realised that we also needed to look at scope 3, which turns out to be travel and shipping. I think to speak a little bit to David's point and Heath around global standards, we have signed up for the Science Based Targets Initiative, and that is a way for us to have a specific pathway to reduce our emissions. So we're working on that in scope 1 and 2, so around our building energy and the fuel that we consume. We have done the work in terms of scope 3, so around travel and freight. And in order to get into the granular detail and actually implement that into our organisation, we're gathering data around the first 20 exhibitions that we did this year with a view to creating carbon budgets for all future exhibitions. And so each exhibition will be assigned a relative carbon budget by location so that we can track the reductions that are going to be implemented. So that's kind of from a data setting targets perspective. But it's a huge task. It's enormous, and there's me as a resource, but there's also many other colleagues in our finance, HR. Like it's big. It's a big job, and I think for smaller organizations there's different challenges, but for a large organization like ours, it's a lot of pestering people to help figure out how to get it done.
But having that data means that you could break it down and see where the big problems lie and take action on that.
Now we're just on the cusp of getting to how we're going to start to make those reductions.
And Kate, so you said business travel in your 2019 audit was the biggest single component of emissions. And since you've done that, you've committed to only participating in art fairs that you can get to by train. Is that right?
Yeah, because I suppose I took a bit of an emergency step in an emergency. I wanted to kind of go try something quite radical in a way. I mean, it's not that radical. I didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We are doing art fairs still, and I still sometimes conflicted about that, when you see visually the waste and things. But the art fairs are also making their changes. We all are. We're all doing it together. And I think, going by train is hard work. I've been to Hanover. I pretty much went to Venice by train. It's really, really tiring, and it's much more expensive, which is, it is very, it's annoying. And, it's the governments aren't subsidising trains. They're subsidising aeroplanes. Makes me very cross. But it's worth it when you know what your saving is. And I think that's incentivising. So it's an experiment, and it's a sort of creative one. It's interesting, and it makes a point. And I know that I think that those gestures are also quite important.
And Cleona, for you, as an international organisation with more than a dozen locations around the world, Hauser and Wirth will inevitably have a lot of international travel. I think we know it can be difficult to change habits and also manage expectations of clients and artists, etc. I think that's particularly true and difficult for the larger organisations. Some of our members and some of the galleries and organisations we speak to have implemented a train first policy similar to Kate's, or some have stipulated that if you have to do essential air travel, then you must go via economy, because that has on average 4 or 5 times less carbon emissions associated with than first class. Also, as Louisa said earlier, everyone's banning private jets. It's not allowed. It's not allowed.
Grounded.
So as we heard earlier, you laid out very clearly the targets and your commitments, and I just wondered what policies you might have in place around travel specifically, bearing in mind how international you are.
I mean, I think that COVID has been a great accelerator of innovation, and it's helped us develop planning strategies around exhibitions so that people aren't traveling to plan the shows in the way that they had done prior to COVID. And I think that there is a policy around only traveling if you need to. And we will be instigating those specific budget around travel in exhibitions for fairs and for other sales activity. So it's coming. It's a big ship that needs to be adjusted and steered in a slightly different direction.
And I think that, it's not just about the personnel travel, but it's also, of course, about the art travel.
Yeah.
And shipping. I know that Heath and I have had a lot of talks about packaging and shipping. And was your largest carbon footprint the personnel side or the art side, or
yeah?
how did those compare?
So interestingly, looking at the GCC tool and also the independent audit that we did with an external consultant, came out shipping was significantly higher. So in the region of like 5,000 carbon tons.
Wow.
So yeah, that's our big one that we really need to work on.
Yeah.
And of course, it's not just the carbon emissions of actually physically shipping, but it's also the waste that's produced.
Bubble wrap.
For sure, it's the combination of waste and emissions which make it, from the data that we've collected, clearly for an average arts organisation, the single most impactful activity they'll engage with. And that's why we launched our sustainable shipping campaign. And I think, because we're going to touch on this, we maybe shouldn't dwell on it too much, but I do want to hear about...
talk about it, because I'm not going to break it down too much on our panel.
Well, what I want to hear from you guys is how you communicate those changes to your suppliers and your artists and your clients and your audiences as well.
Yeah, I mean, asking questions of suppliers as much as you can. I mean, it's interesting. I was using City Mapper this morning, and they're already giving you your CO2 for your journeys. So, that's where we want to get to. And so some shippers are making really good progress there. They're giving us the CO2, and we can then pass that on to the collectors. GCC did a shipping Zoom the other day, and it was announced that Crozier were doing a sea shipment to Hong Kong, and I think all the registrars on that Zoom sort of quickly jumped onto that, and it was full, and I didn't get on it. So it's progress, it's coming, but it's slow, and it's sort of not time to celebrate yet. There's lots to do, and it's huge infrastructure we're dealing with that we've that's very long standing. So it's these new ways of thinking about some of the things that Francis touched on. It all has to be in tandem with those new ways of thinking about what an artwork is. Does it have to last forever, etc.
For sure. I think from my experience of researching the issues around shipping, the main takeaway is that we have to reduce overall volumes. That's a really important part of this in adapting how we program and how we plan, how we coordinate and how we ship. But also our dependency on airplanes, whether it's through shipping or individual travel, as a sector and as a society, we really need to readdress those relationships.
Yeah, and I think it's also, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to add that I think another interesting initiative that was talked about earlier around Artists Commit, but we did the climate impact report for the Gustav Metzger show that happened last year, and it was really interesting how it engaged the team in Somerset. And so that, it talked about engaging the artist estate around what was happening with that show and how the team then accordingly planned the show. So I think like that kind of tool is an amazing resource to help galleries have a more climate conscious approach to what they're doing.
And it's about creating ownership. And if people within institutions feel like they have, a part to play and a voice in the process, and they feel that they're a part of it, then it's more exciting and more engaging. And then also that can be amplified. So it's the climate impact report is a great way to get people on board for sure. Yeah, I think, but it's also really interesting. And I don't know if you have had this experience as well, but it's it's about like rethinking again our designs and like how, like going back to like systems thinking as well, because it's not just about, okay, we can just switch over from this to this, but we also need to look at the business models. I mean, right now it's not really possible to just, you know, flip the switch and just move everything over to sea freight. You also have to think about like, okay, well, why are we using airplanes? It's because we're not planning far enough ahead in order to make things, you know, more systemic and circular. So it's really, I think that's like why this idea of cooperation and collaboration is so incredibly important. But yeah, I think, I don't know, Kate, if you have any kind of thoughts about like...
Yeah, it's, you know, this whole thing is a learning process.
Yeah.
And, you know, when I sort of was interested in the subject, I really didn't know the facts and figures. And it also takes a while to adjust to it. It's an enormous undertaking, you know, the implications of the whole climate crisis. So I think it is something that you slowly adjust to. You can't expect people to change their habits overnight, and the infrastructures don't really allow us to either.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe in the future we'll all have to measure our carbon, it will be like a tax return. You know, we do need help from governments, we do need legislation, I think.
And standards. We need
standards, yeah. And sharing best practices. I mean, one of the expressions that they have in the Netherlands is, you know, you don't want to be the first person to stick your head out of the cornfield or it'll get chopped off. Yeah. And like we need, yeah, welcome to Holland. But, you know, we need these like leaders, like communicating what they're doing and standing up and saying, we're making a stand and we're doing this, because then you can be pointed to and say like, oh, well, did you know that, you know, Tate Modern is only having this amount of exhibitions, so we don't need to try and keep up with all of the exhibitions they have. We can actually slow down as well. So it's, as I love what you said about the process, and I always talk about sustainability as a journey, and it really is about, you know, it's okay to not be perfect right now. Like we just have to be transparent. We need to communicate about what we're doing. We need to celebrate our successes, and you know,
and you
collect
might
more
look back
information.
and think, you know, that was wrong and that was right. You know, we didn't have that right, but it's okay.
But
I think it's a process. And
100%. 100%.
Couldn't agree more. Unfortunately, we're really close to the end of this panel already.
Already?
It's been so quickly, a short slot. Before we do finish, as Louisa did in the last panel, I'd like to ask each of you for an insight, a word of advice, an action point that could help our audience if they're, you know, at the beginning of this journey towards sustainability.
I think from our perspective, one thing that's been really interesting is harnessing the expertise and creativity of staff members in particular departments. So one really good example is we've got a registrar based in London called Poppy Fairfax, and she's like really driving the data gathering for carbon budgets. And without her skills and knowledge around this area, that project wouldn't be pushed forward. So I think it's like about identifying who in your organization has a real passion and drive for it, and then giving them the training and tools to push it forward.
Fantastic. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I just think about where you put your money. I mean, I know that's a bit more general, but like every time you make a decision, it's really easy to fall back and make bad decisions. And if you actually stop and think, what am I putting my money into here? Just, you know, make sure that you're somehow aware of what its effect is on the environment. I mean, that's incredibly general, but I think
consumer
it's been a good
demand
one
will
for
drive
me.
change.
Yeah. Put your money, and you know, and you're helping drive new economies that are healthier. So.
Yeah. And Caitlin, what about you?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot. Okay. I'd say use the resources that are available. I mean, join KiCulture, use the GCC carbon calculator and all of the incredible resources they have. We saw this morning so many different organizations that are working on this. You guys are not alone in this. You don't have to have all of the answers. That's our job. So, you know, ask. If you have questions, there are people out there to help support you. If you are looking for information, it does exist now, and that's really exciting. And if you need support, you know, this is what organizations like GCC and Art Switch and all of the PACT organizations, galleries commit, artists commit, you know, Art to Acres. There's so many different places that you can turn to. So use those resources, and don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah. That's a good one. And if I can add one as well, it's something that's been said a lot today, but it's community, it's collaboration. We can't do this together. We have to work in an aligned, productive, cooperative, collegial manner. We don't have time to work in isolation. We have to cooperate, and I think that's just so important.
Yeah. And I couldn't agree with Heath more. And I think that that's like, once again, such the beauty of this is that we are all working towards a collective end. And I think what we've learned today is that like things are happening. And how exciting is it that like we are at the beginning of this journey. We have a long way to go, but look at this community. Like we're there together to support each other. We have solutions that are ready to be implemented. We just need to know about them. So I would love to encourage everyone to use your voice, ask the questions. I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable what we can do collectively if we're all speaking up about the fact that we're willing to accept, 6 weeks for our artworks to get there, or we're willing to redesign our exhibitions so that we can be more sustainable, or that we're willing to just make a commitment to travel by train. So it's really, we have the power to make this happen, and we're going to. But you guys, we're all just gonna like put our boots on the ground, and it's a little bit more work, but we're almost there. So collectively, we will get there.
Right on time as well. What a good question.
Nailed it!
Okay, everybody. Well, it's the last panel, the last session of the day. What a day it's been, but this is going to be a great, great packed panel, as you can see. And some of the issues raised already in the discussions will overlap with and be expanded on in our last panel. And this panel deals with accountability in the supply chain and how its various elements, shippers, clients, insurers, registrars, how they can all be made to bat on, people want to bat on the same team and to really work for a more sustainable sector. So my panelists are Tom Wilson, Global Head of Operations at Christie's, Simon Hornby, next to him, Senior Vice President and General Manager of Crozier Europe, the fine art shippers and purveyors of logistics. Jason Baylor-Losh, Director of Business Development and the art shippers Detel International, and Adam Prideaux, Managing Director of Haller International Insurance Brokers, and last but absolutely not least, Hannah Wright, Registrar at Thomas Dane Gallery. So what I'm going to do, I'm zipping along here because I want us not to end too late, but you might have to end a few minutes later, I'm afraid. Just for each of us to give a little talk about where they're at, what they and their organisation are doing, and what needs to be done to green up the supply chain, and then we'll open it up to discussion. Tom, I'm starting with you because as Global Head of Operations, you cover every element of the supply chain in one way or another. And at Christie's, you've already been nailing your green colours to the mast, and you've just published your latest environmental impact report, and you've also entered into a consolidated sea freight shipping partnership with Crozier, so next to there. So can you just give us a quick lowdown on all of this? No challenge. Just a bit of a broad brushstroke where you've
Certainly, and thank you, Hauser and Wirth, for inviting us. It's lovely to be here. We launched our sustainability programme last year, as you know. We've just published our second environmental impact report. You can get it on our website. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but it's very comprehensive, very detailed. Everything is there. We don't hide anything. Our strategy is comprised of 3 pillars: commit, communicate, and collaborate. The commit part of it is to reduce our emissions by 50% and achieve net zero by 2030. And this last year, we've done a lot. We've actually got to our 2030 target with a little bit of help from COVID, I'm afraid to say. And we expect that to rebound a little bit, but we've done a lot. We've made a lot of progress, and we also got validated by the Science Based Target Initiative, just like Hauser have. And so we're thrilled with the progress we made on commit. We've got some things going on with waste too. The communicate pillar is, and it's been said before in an earlier panel, is about being transparent, and it's about being honest and having conversations like this one. And of course, the environmental impact report. And then finally, our collaborate pillar is particularly important for us because, of course, the commercial art market is a sort of a bit of a bell curve, isn't it? There's a handful of very big commercial organisations, and then there's a very, very long tail of much smaller organisations. And I think it is incumbent on big organisations who've got the resources, have got the wherewithal to drive change, and oftentimes to fund change, to create the imperative in the supply chain to fund change. So that collaborate pillar is really important for us. Obviously, we were very privileged to participate in the Artists for ClientEarth initiative that you mentioned earlier. It was a great honour for us to do that. But for me, the really interesting and important work that we're doing with our supply chain on things like packaging standards, shipping standards, and of course the sea freight initiative with Crozier are really practical, immediate ways that we can start to drive change.
Fantastic. Well, Simon, as well as partnering up with Christie's, we had an earlier conversation, and you said that you're committed to making an active commitment to wide systemic change and to promote a circular economy. But you're also in a very competitive business world. I mean, how does that tally up, the circular economy, the systemic change, with you running a successful business and answering to your shareholders?
Well, I think, Louisa, you're setting me up to be the bogeyman here with a
question. No.
So we are part of the solution. Let's get that on the table. And it is collaborative. So I think just to give you a bit of context in where we sit at KiCulture, we have, 30 storage facilities worldwide in 20 locations. We operate about 110, 115 specialized art transport vehicles. We employ about 450 individuals globally and about 5 to 5.5 million cubic feet of storage. So in terms of the art world, we're quite a large player, but in terms of the logistic industry, we're a rounding error. And what I talk about is that a lot of what we can do can only be on the coattails of others in a wider context. So if you think about logistics, you think about FedEx, UPS, Maersk, and these others, it's those larger players that we really have to follow and encourage, and whether it's by our own purchasing decisions or it's investment with your pension fund, that is where the change is really going to take place. What we can do in our small logistics part of the industry is be a voice which really punches outside of our weight in the sense that we are the conscience, I think, as an extension of the art world in what we do, how we can behave, and how we can encourage that type of reflective behavior. So when we think about moving, and I loved it earlier talking about the difference between really sustainability and this move to the circularity of the economy, everything I've heard today convinces me that the art world can move in and of itself to a much more circular economy. And so when we think about what we're doing, we're investing in the latest Euro 6 trucks to reduce our emissions where we can. Our first electric vehicle will be in London.
What about your storage?
The storage is relatively straightforward, and I'll explain why. And it's great that I haven't had to do a lot of this explanation earlier because of others have talked about the investment of energy in a building. Typically, we will take an older building and convert it. So we're not destroying the energy, the carbon that has actually been put into it. We then will add sustainable machines. So in a sense, we design now our own HVAC. The difference between an office environment and a retail environment, what we have is, once we've conditioned the air, we don't want to let it out. The art doesn't care if the air is circulated 0 times an hour, 50 times an hour. So when you think about the practicality of how to retain what you've created, it's pretty simple. And the last thing I would say, talking about, Glenstone articulated it perfectly, that if you can think about a concept of passive climate, which means you use the environment in which you're based towards your end for extending the life cycle of an asset, in this case it's artworks we're talking about, it becomes much easier. In LA, where we now have 6 locations, we actually don't use air conditioning for a lot of it because we don't need it. The climate means that we can regulate it in different ways. You can build bunkers underground, as Glenstone alluded to. So all of this means that we are part of the solution. We've just got to work on really the steps to get there on a collaborative basis. I could go on for a long time.
I'm stopping you now.
Louisa, you know me far too well.
You're seeing the whites of my eyes at this point.
Yeah.
No, but that's fantastic. That's really, really interesting. Thank you so much. And I think all that stuff about actually, recycling the air, being aware of the surrounding ambient temperatures is really, really interesting stuff, and the leverage. Jason, in the GCC's Sustainable Shipping Report, which I urge you all to go look at online, we should have really drilled into it deeper, we haven't had time, but do look because they make fantastic recommendations. But it says it can be up to 90% less carbon to ship by sea. But when we spoke earlier, you were robustly, I would say negative, you would say realistic, about really the problems and the hazards and the real kind of practical difficulties about sea freight. You're saying everyone's talking about it, but it's very difficult to achieve.
I think anybody who knows me would say that I'm nothing but honest. So, and there's a few people in here who know me well. So, ocean isn't a silver bullet. It isn't going to fix the problem.
What is?
There's a multi-set, but I'll tell you why to begin with. And I say this with a caveat because I don't want you to think that I'm saying it because of how big Deville is or what we do. We're the largest provider in the States for art shipping. We have 11 offices.
Lots of leverage.
Lots of leverage, but in the last 3.5 years, and we don't often give these numbers, but I'm giving them so you get a sense of the scale of the art shipping. We have shipped 56,000 shipments and 23 million kilos worth of art. That's in a downturn. Now, I'm telling you this because transferring that all to ocean isn't an option. And the systemic problems that arises from are a lot of what everybody's been talking about.
What about a big chunk of it then?
Ocean freight is problematic in so many ways right now because of the supply chain and the availability. We're looking at 3 to 4 months out for any ocean shipping. You can't practically get a reefer container for anywhere you want to go right now. And additionally, we can't guarantee that we've never been able to guarantee that any containers go in the belly of the vessel, unless you're shipping ro-ro or Mafi.
Roll on, roll off, that means.
Yeah, so there's a safety issue here too. And if we deliver to a port and they cancel that vessel and then your artwork's sitting in there for a month at the pier waiting for the next boat, which happens regularly now, that's an issue. One more thing is nobody mentions the harbor maintenance fee.
That's in America, isn't it, only?
It's all imports into the United States require a 0.125% fee with no max on the value of any shipment going into the harbors in the United States. We just had 2 shipments come in. One was 10,500 and the other was 25,000.
So it's all gloom. What are you going to do? How? Because you do care about the environment. You told me you did.
We do. And we were one of the first to start integrating sustainability principles into our daily business.
How?
Let me tell you. So on every one of our estimates you're going to see, and it's has happened since 2019, you should see this as the carbon footprint of every shipment. And then what we have been doing since 2019, and I know it's a negative thing in much of the vocabulary in this room, is offsetting. But we offset with projects like Jariampa Red Plus. They go into a community in the Brazilian rainforest that was doing slash and burn agriculture and teach fishery, agriculture, and long-term sustainable practices that change the way they do that.
So we would call it strategic climate fund.
100%.
We'd call it offset.
But from our point of view, donate into Art to Acres because it's wonderful. Strategic climate funds, anything. But if you're going to ship on the scale that you're shipping right now, and you're going to do a nominal amount of ocean shipping to do that, what are you doing with the rest of it? Start doing something right now about all of those other things. Now, real quick, I know we're short on time.
You've got lots of time to talk amongst yourselves in a minute. Well, not lots, but some.
The other part of this is collaboration. So collaboration, we work with Rockbox, we work with Earthcrate, ArtSwitch, KiCulture, which has been fantastic, and Barter we're working with right now as well too. So the last part of this is education. I think that the biggest thing we can possibly do right now is educate everybody in our sector. And it's not just single individuals, and I've heard this from everybody in here and I love it. It's really about educating everybody inside of your businesses and then having them implement change long term and spread that wealth of knowledge. So we work with KiCulture on the Keys Futures program that we're going to start training all of our deedles to be out there in the world and learning about this stuff at the same time.
Excellent. So, lots of good things. I'm sure the Crows will want to take you up on some of these points, but I'm just going to go over now to my last 2 panelists. Adam, I mean, everyone goes, yeah, but it's insurance, you know. I mean, shipping, it's the insurance. Shipping, it's the insurance. I mean, we have actually, you know, in the GCC already there's been a kind of a checklist of shipping criteria. That's been announced. We've got the sense of the key mark of Lloyd's Market Association Joint Specie Committee, not yet quite published, but going to be a whole load of guidelines about taking out insurance for sea freight. So, despite the massive gloom and doom, there is still some hope. But you did say that when we spoke earlier on other panels that there has been, dare I say the pun, a large sea change in how insurance is being viewed and shipping freight is being viewed. Could you just talk a little bit about the insurance climate and what's being done?
there's been a huge amount of change, which for insurance is the insurance industry is quite unusual. I mean, I've been insuring art and museums and galleries and collectors for 30 years, and in all this time, I mean, rarely, if we had to insure works going by sea, it was because they were very big or too heavy, they're too big to go by air, basically. And what has happened recently is as galleries started to go to more fairs, and it was really the rise of the fairs, particularly ones like Miami, where lots of commercial guys would say, we're going to send things by sea because it's cheap. It was much, much cheaper. And they'd call me up, and I'd call up the insurers, and I'd say, okay, can this gallery send it by sea? And they go, no. One thing that's not really known by most of the art world is that the majority of insurers really don't want to insure works of art going by sea. That was it. Indeed, there are lots of insurers, even right now, art insurers, who will not insure works going by sea. So
is that for all the reasons that Jason says?
Well, potentially. I mean, the thing is that the risks are so much greater than air. And when you really start to analyse the risk, the moment a work leaves a gallery to the moment it arrives wherever it is going at an art fair, it's just the length of time. I mean, the fact that you're taking a truck to a port, it might sit at the port, then it's loaded onto a boat. You ask for it to go into the below deck. There's no guarantee. Is the container watertight? Is it refrigerated? More often than not. And then you've got the journey on the sea. Well, there are things like storms and hurricanes, and containers fall off these ships. But one of the things that it really affects insurers' lack of desire to cover sea trans is also something that's not known, is a very technical insurance term called general salvage, which is where if a boat sinks, because they do, or have done, or they run aground or adrift, the cost of the salvage operation is apportioned according to the value on that boat being shipped. So, we have had, I think it was AXA Art, had a well-known story of a Henry Moore that was going to the Caribbean, and the boat went down in shallow ground, water rather. It was salvaged, but the value of the work was £10 million. The actual grain on the boat was less than £100,000. So the art shippers had to pay for 95% of the cost of bringing up. This is in addition to whatever damage was done to the artwork. So if you take the standpoint that there's not a lot of desire, the insurers are concerned about it. So, but having said this, there are insurers who are not bothered by it. They say, fine, we'll charge a little bit more premium, and we might put a higher excess, so the amount that the client, has to cover if there is a claim. And this has worked well. It's now when the Gallery Climate Coalition came to me and said, could I give some guidelines, because what was being proposed was, we're going to send all art by sea. I was like, well, the problem is, how are you going to do that? Because the insurance market is not ready for this. And in fact, is so ill prepared that there were many just saying, we're out, we can't do it. Now, one of the things that I know, because I look after lots of galleries, is that very few people in galleries actually know what their insurance covers. So they assume you can just put it in a boat and it's covered. I can tell you probably 75%, 80%, it's not covered. It's excluded. So unless you've gone through this check of, read the terms and conditions,
small print, who does?
You are probably not covered. Now, my role with the GCC was basically as a conduit to all the insurers in Lloyd's. And I have to thank Chris Bentley at AXA XL, because he actually assisted.
Who was here earlier, but had to go pick his child up.
All the insurers together. This is incredible. These are all fiercely competitive companies, all vying for galleries and collectors and museums business. And they sat down and they said, okay, let's collaborate. Let's do a list. What do we want that would satisfy us in order to insure works going by sea? And they've done that. And it's really quite amazing. I mean, I've never seen such collaboration before.
And that's going to be published soon, but in essence,
I thought it had been published.
It's already there.
Oh, because Chris Benton said he was going to, it was not quite out yet.
The majority of it's on
But most, I was going to say, most of it's on the GCC website already.
So the point about this is that now, if you want to send something by sea, you can say to your broker or your insurer, I'm going to send it by sea, and I've complied with all the Lloyd's conditions for being able to, satisfy a sea transit cover. And the insurer will go, fine, no problem. They might charge a bit more premium. They might put a slightly higher excess. But if they don't, then you know you are with the wrong insurer. I mean, if they say, oh no, we're not interested in doing that, you need to find another insurer. So I suppose the point is that the insurance, certainly in the London market, Lloyd's, which is still the centre of the global art insurance business, is really made a huge amount of effort to support the change. They are fearful. I mean, it's not for us to say what works could go by sea, or should or shouldn't. But there are still great concerns, and what Jason was saying about works getting stuck in ports. If you get a container full of works of art in a port that gets stuck there for a month.
Your booth in the art fair looks.
Well, your booth in the art fair is gone, but that what can happen if it's not refrigerated is that the changes in temperature, it will damage them. It's not the safest way. But I'm pleased that now the conversation and the admin and the hassle. I mean, I've had examples where galleries have called up and said, I want to send it by sea. I go, you can't because your insurer doesn't allow you. And then we have to change the insurance company overnight to one that would. Galleries don't need that hassle and that cost. So this is all about planning, speaking to the broker, speaking to the insurer, lining it up so that when you need to do it, you can do it. And it takes up no time.
And also shippers working with reliable sea freight operatives, which is a whole other ballgame. But I'm just going to, because Hannah hasn't had a chance to say a thing yet, and you are at the Rock Face, and it's your job at Thomas Dane to make sure the works get there in one piece and on time, for the art fair, the exhibition, whatever. And I know that, you've been very much involved with the GCC's sustainable shipping campaign. And one of the things that you were talking about was standardised emissions, something that you wanted very much, the data, so that you could get the carbon footprint, the carbon cost, as well as the fiscal cost on estimates or invoices, and also for the whole industry to slow down, plan in advance. Elaborate on what would make a difference for you, what's being done and what's being... I mean, we've had a lot of gloom about shipping, but you're still optimistic.
Don't worry. I guess the role of the gallery in the supply chain, I'll sort of start with. I guess we cover all the things we've spoken about today: artists, shippers, suppliers, collectors. And I guess the education, as Adam said, and talking about it and bringing everyone together is, I think, where galleries can really thrive and help to move this forward. In terms of, shipping and emissions, we've obviously launched a sustainable shipping campaign. One of the main things that we're asking for is emissions data. As many people have said, we need to know what we're dealing with before we can, we need to understand it before we can do those reductions. So it's really hard, as I'm sure some people who have done that report, to get that information without doing a lot of digging. If you're, shipping loads a year and you need to find specific weights for each thing and it's not by air all the time for road freight, that's really hard. So as part of the sustainable shipping campaign, we're sort of calling on, shippers and other people to work with us and collaborate, to bring a standard together, the first standard maybe of this is the information that is needed, this is where it can be found. All the galleries know that. It means that shippers aren't getting bombarded with requests all the time as more people do their carbon reports. To find all of this data would be a massive step forward for that side of things. But in terms of, I wanted to pick up on something regarding collectors that was kind of spoken about earlier.
Sure.
Jump to a totally different thing.
No, it's fine.
There's
so many strands.
I agree. Galleries I totally agree with that. Galleries need to advocate for that, and that's part of the advocacy part of this, which doesn't have an impact on our carbon reporting at all. If we don't pay for it, it's not a part of your carbon report. But I would say being on, I guess, the front line of that, you know, there is a lot of pressure with this, I want it now. And it's not everybody, but there are still very much I need it now, you know, it has to come, pressure, and it's just going to storage. So I think, you know, we have a lot of advocacy to go out there and talk about these things and make it more public, our stance, but also to have that conversation and to have that open-mindedness to that kind of thing. From that side, kind of will bring everything to full circle in a sense. I could talk about loads of other stuff, but we'll get into.
No, but I think it's interesting. I mean, Simon, you know, you've heard.
By the way, Lucy, I can see why we're sitting on this side and they're on there.
Well, I just wanted you to answer. You know, you're both. Yeah. I mean, you're very different companies. You have different layers of activity, but you're both shipping and logistics, and you've both given quite different points of view. So I'm just curious if you'd like to counter anything that Jason's raised in terms of, you know,
context is everything. I'm not saying that air freight is going away tomorrow. No, you know, far from it. Biofuels. Let's encourage aviation industry to do the right thing. In terms of how we think about managing the risk with sea freight, first of all, the data. The data is actually that air freight and cargo, providing you're using food quality containers, you're using reliable shipping lines where you can actually track it with GPS, so we pretty much know where not only the ship but the container is at any one time. And you're planning well in advance, so you do have contingencies, plus it's a reefer, so it is refrigerated. So together with the Christie's risk team, we went through all of this because our liability is at stake as well to both identify and then address what the risk transfer should be for each of these identified areas. So we think coming out of that and then looking at the checklist that was issued with the shipping guidelines, we think there is a framework there for much more to go by sea.
I guess it's the much more, isn't it? How much more are you able
So
to
then
do?
we think about what it is by kilo, by cubic kilo, whether it's the transverse between weight and volume. And I would expect that over the next 3 to 5 years, we could probably see an uptick of 50%, because that is where we can demonstrate that there is both value in terms of cost reduction. I think the supply chain can only get better. We've not had any issues with getting hold of containers and shipping between New York and Hong Kong. So it must be by experience. But I would say when you look at it holistically, for a lot of artwork, based on a specific value and a specific profile, it is the way to go, provided you can plan in advance.
Not all ocean is built the same, right? So we're members of Clean Cargo. Clean Cargo looks at shipping routes that are actually sustainable. So if you book with us, you're going to get the cleanest routing possible. So if it's on Maersk and it's between Los Angeles and Japan, and it's more money, you're going to pay more money because we're using the cleanest route possible. We've never actually shipped more ocean than we are shipping right now. We still have delays. It's just the experience we've had. I can't speak to anybody else. But I know one of the things that we deal with on a daily basis with art fairs as well, we don't get the checklist from our galleries until the day before it ships via air.
Planning.
And if we're being realistic, are the galleries going to select the works that are going to an art fair 4 months before the fair or 3 months before the fair to get it ready for the ocean? Is that work going to be hot and selling in 4 months' time the way it does when they ship it right away? For Basel alone, we had 40 late shipments for all of our galleries. Like everybody had to ship last minute because they didn't have the works they needed. So the model of how we do business needs to change. And we're more than willing to ship via ocean if you give us enough time, and then you don't get mad at us when it gets bumped. But if we're being realistic, we're gonna choose, our job is to ship the safest way possible. So we're gonna look at the artwork and determine whether or not that's appropriate for the works that you're giving us at the time, and then give you an honest answer on whether or not it works for that shipment or doesn't.
Tom?
Yeah, I just want to pick up on a couple of things. Having a very sort of pragmatic and practical, realistic view on all the reasons why you shouldn't do it and all the difficulties or potential challenges, there's nothing wrong per se with that. But in a way, that's all the more reason why we've got to lean into it. If I think about this initiative that we're supporting, I'm thinking about it in the long term. We have the wherewithal to develop a capability, and it's not perfect yet. There are lots of obstacles to it, but we need to fund it because we can, and over time we can develop that capability. We can find solutions quite possibly to some of the challenges that you've rightly pointed out. And you're right, Josh, it's not the silver bullet. There isn't a silver bullet in any of this, but it is part of the toolkit. We're never going to ship at Christie's all of our things by sea freight. Of course we're not. But if I can take our highest volume route is London to New York. If I think of all of our international freight, if I can just switch 20% of that to sea freight, I'm saving thousands of tons of carbon a year because we're a big organisation. We ship a lot of stuff. The second thing I wanted to say is, I think it's about choice. Actually, and one of your speakers earlier was saying this as well, but you were saying this. Well, it was implied in what you were saying, that there are many people who would jump at the opportunity to do this and don't mind about waiting. So it is incumbent upon organisations like ours to offer the choice. And when you do offer the choice, it's amazing the response that you sometimes get. It blew my mind that our London to Hong Kong route was sold out straight away. I mean, that was I can't remember who said they couldn't manage to get onto it. Sorry about that. I wasn't anticipating that because that's a long way and it's quite a tortuous route as well. But I think the learning for me is that you've got to create the choice and you've got to create the capability and think to the long term, because then you can overcome things.
So it's the leverage. I also, of course, the other aspect which we've been talking about in kind of parallel is not just the carbon footprint, but also the zero waste, the packaging, the crates, all this. I mean, we've got King of Rockbox over here. There's a lot of, there are very good kind of solutions, but I mean, this is a huge problem. Also, recycling, reusing. I mean, how do you kind of grapple with that?
So for us, we work with Rockbox. We distribute Rockbox in the States, and Rockbox has some amazing product that everyone should be using and investing in long term.
We'll take our commission later.
But there's other options out there available too. There's Earthcrate, which is fantastic. Earthcrate offers a fully recyclable shipping system.
Do you have these in your...
They're out of New York, so we can source those as well too. I think also one of the things that we're doing is for ISOFAT. ISOFAT and Artem are the two largest shipping organizations in the world. They encompass a majority of all of your art shippers, your largest. And ISOFAT, I'm on the Green Committee, and we're pushing to do a sustainable calculation tool, basically, that tells you what the carbon footprint and the life cycle of your crates are. So on your estimates, you're going to see the life cycle of your crates shortly as well, too. We're also implementing the API into our system so that we can automatically see what the flight routings are for everything that we're doing and give you accurate data on what is happening for sustainability.
And you've got to have enough crates in each location to be able to recycle them, of course. There've got to be the spare ones there to go back with. I mean, she says in a very...
The States is a bigger problem with that, like keeping those in all those locations. So I think it's up to the galleries and the museums to start purchasing these things and have them on hand for all of their distribution and their loans.
How does that work with you, Hannah? How do you...
I mean, there's just going to be a storage issue on the front of galleries and museums, I'm sure, packaging is definitely an area that I would say for us is something that we, it's going to be really hard to change and to advocate for, and the circular economy, as you said, Louisa, of getting things back and making sure that works. It is a lot of coordination, which I actually I don't know how that's going to change.
Consolidation and coordination.
Yeah, but I guess with shippers and the companies that have those products, by working together and coming together, there must be a way, if we have all of these international shippers all around the world with lots of different storage locations all using some of the products, there must be a way of working together to make sure that empty rock box doesn't come back with, it doesn't come back with nothing in it, for example. But I don't think that is currently how it's functioning to my knowledge.
I think it comes out, and also there's a lot of competitive businesses out there, I mean, it's very difficult for all of you in this very competitive situation to be joining hands with other auction houses, other shippers, other galleries, up to a point, or maybe it isn't, I don't know. But you're shaking your head.
I think it's as hard as you want to make it, there is no such thing as competition in sustainability, clearly, you said that earlier, and you're quite right. I think specifically on the idea of a take back or reuse program for packaging, the biggest single enabler of that is standardization. If packaging standards were much more ubiquitous, then and shippers were able to think about their revenue streams in a slightly different way.
So we're talking conservation, we're talking sustainability, we're talking right across the board.
You've got a lot of storage infrastructure in the shipping network globally. You can utilize that in a much more efficient way. Many other industries do it. We can do it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I think the solution is not user-owned packaging. I think it is companies like us, Deville and others, who have to really supply it. Otherwise, you don't get the efficiency. You've got crates sitting around taking up property, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But I think also the business model that then accompanies it actually makes it easier, it's more attractive financially. We're just piloting something this year. Our Swiss business has had a crate rental program for probably the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And so we have 450, 500 crates sitting there. We own quite a lot of space, so we can do it effectively, more than a gallery, who's in, a pricey part of town, let's be honest about it, typically, because it's a retail environment. So I think that's part of the solution, but Tom is 100% right. If you can standardize a crate spec, regardless of whether it's Rockbox, whether it's one made from our crating workshops, that is acceptable to everybody. It comes back to conservators playing their role, registrars, it's everybody. So I think that's low-hanging fruit. Let's develop a standard, because then we can have interoperability between all of our systems. And that is one of the basics of really getting into circularity of how you think.
Brilliant.
And a good old wooden crate, I've seen them 25 years
on
old,
war horses,
30 years old.
On, yeah.
At the end of it, you take out the hardware, it's combustible.
Yeah.
You can think about it differently. And last thing, I promise, Louisa, there are new materials available every day.
Mycelium!
And how you think about it. So that's the area where we can really change quickly.
No, sure, that's...
Can I ask a question? What you said you have like all of these crates things. Are they being used all the time, or what do you need from? Like, what can we do, and what do you need from galleries to get that buy-in? Like, how do you feel like that can actually
So
start
first of all,
taking
if every gallery can agree their crate spec, number one. So that shouldn't be too difficult, I don't think, because we're all trying to do the same thing, which is it's all about risk at the end of the day, right? The second thing is it's understanding the volumes, and that's data. So capturing the data. And then you can begin to model it, and then you can pilot it. You're not going to have the solution on day one. No. But I think all of us are committed to working on these solutions, and maybe we get it wrong on day one. And day 5, we've figured it out. You need more crates here or more crates
Right, you can
there.
discuss this over a drink in a minute, but I'm just going to... No, it's good stuff. It's all fantastic. It's just, too many great issues. We're going to be winding up in a second, but I'm doing my annoying thing as well. We've all been doing it intermittently throughout the day, is to get each of you, yet again, because we're about actions here. This is about sustainable actions, about things to practically do. So I'm going to do a bit of practical doing. Adam, you haven't had a moment in the sun for a while, so you give us your one or two, whatever you like, practical takeaways that can happen now to make a difference.
Well, I mean, it's
opinion.
sort of read the small print of the insurance policy. Not that they'd say there is any, actually, it's small print, but you have to have the relationship with your broker and insurer and ask them and plan it in advance. So when you do want to send much more by sea, it's all set up. It's just, you don't need to think about it. And you certainly don't need to get rejected. The other thing I would just, is there needs to be an overhaul of the government indemnity system. And I'm sort of lobbing that one out there because it is antiquated. And for a lot of museums and public institutions, the standards that the government indemnity system puts in place on them leads to huge environmental damage. And I think this is all talking about reductions in temperature control, humidity control, but also just things like, having individuals who fly with works in order to look after them. I mean, that's got to change. Commercial insurers, their standards of risk management are so much lower than government indemnities around the world.
So lobby the government then about their indemnity as well. Okay, fantastic. Jason, what are your takeaways?
Education. I think education is the biggest thing.
In what way? How does that manifest itself? Briefly.
Manifest education through groups like KiCulture. I think if you're not supporting them and giving them a bunch of money, you're doing an injustice to the entire...
Rock box and KiCulture between them.
But I will say this as well too. We've talked a lot about the big players. We've talked about the auction houses and the blue chip galleries. What are the mid-tier galleries going to do? And what are those artists who are not giant artists, who can't dictate sustainable action in moving their artwork? They're just happy to have a gallery. So it might be up to some of the big players to help subsidize some of those mid-tier galleries being able to participate in KiCulture or get their rock boxes. Everybody needs to help everybody on the bottom.
Collegiality. Simon, you've already talked about standardisation, so maybe that's one tick. What else would
you need another tick?
Yes. Come on.
Yeah, more standardisation. No, I think part of the behavioural change that needs to happen is having the right information presented in the right way. We were talking earlier about, for an art community, how unartistic some of the information is presented. I think if you think about advertising, changing consumer behaviour, we need to get smarter at how we get this stuff out there.
Fantastic. Hannah, last word from you.
I think going back to programming and forward planning, which is the top of the agenda that I have for the gallery anyway, whether that is what we will get to, is bringing artists into the conversation. It's the start of the supply chain that we're talking about, and we need to work with them to be able to do things in advance, get our gallery program working so we can do C-freight, so we can give the insurers as much notice, so we can work on packaging, etc. I think if we can start there and really get buy-in and work, together, hear what they want from us, that is the start of it, and then hopefully the rest will follow on.
Listen to the artists, everybody get organised. I mean, what an amazing day we've had. I mean, so many takeaways: collegiality, data sharing, standardisation, the whole notion of being able to kind of put artists first, being able to really join together, not be competitive, be kind of united in this whole quest to take action. But I think the leverage and the lobbying, even in this fantastic structure, there's so much potential leverage, so much potential power, so many things we can do. Take it slow, get organised, program differently. I think the business shift is really interesting too, that anybody wants it by yesterday. It's not going to be a good look to be doing that, we hope. Like, it's not going to be a good look to fly in by a helicopter or zip off on a private jet or do all this stuff. It's not going to be a good look to be conspicuous in that way. People can still, I thought Kate saying, well, how you spend your money is really interesting. There's so much money in our sector. It doesn't have to be crazy dinners. It can be sustainable projects. It can be better ways of channeling those resources. So many things to take away. That's just me garbling off the top of my head. But so many other things that have been amazing. So I really wanted to say that anybody who's got any thoughts, do again to the individual panelists. Put it sustainability@hauserworth.com. Everybody out there, off in the global sphere, do that, please. So it just really leaves for me to say thank you so much to all my panellists here and the other panellists throughout the afternoon. You've all been so amazing. Thank you so much. And also to thank our fantastically generous hosts, Hauser and Wirth. What a day, what a setting. What a lunch! And I especially want to give thanks to Debbie Hilliard, who's been so fantastic, and Sophie, wherever she is, I can't see her, there she is, Sophie Wiles, who've been so brilliant in organising all this, herding all these different cats, ably assisted by Phoebe Selby. Thank you for your phone, for making me keep time, and all the Hauser team. Big shout out to Francis Till for all the tech and his whole team making all this work properly, so no mean feat at all. And thank you, everybody here, for joining us in real life, out there in the sphere, the ethosphere, out there in the virtual world. Thank you for being such a great audience. So let's now put all these things into practice. Let's, absolutely take action, put these things into practice. And thank you for coming. And upwards and onwards. Thank you so much.